1. Message from Hogwarts. Even if the guidance is broken, please become the Elden Lord. That was the last thing the witch had whispered before she died. Time and space in the Forbidden Land had warped around her, and in her final moments the future sounded like an echo against stone. Her tarnished answered her call, though the voice had come in a form she did not expect. Is it a rebirth? This body? A girl named Hermione? Hermione still remembered, in fragments, the witch she had once been. She remembered a champion on the way, the promise of a journey to seek blessings, to forge new laws and mend a shattered world. She remembered asking for a fairy tale in the next life. Then a silent attack had struck, brutal and unseen. In the instant before death, the witch could only leave one last wish. I hope the next life is a fairy tale world. Wind screamed like unending grief over Stormhill. Fallen leaves brought tidings, but the world around Hermione was chaos. She heard terrified voices, the clamor of people fleeing. Her new memories were splintered and raw. She was being carried away, stumbling, the stench of panic close enough to taste. Death pressed in like a weather front. A sharp green glow flashed and vanished. Scream and flight swelled into a single, rising tide. Even with her eyes closed, she felt blinded by that sudden light. It was a magic she'd never seen, carrying the unmistakable scent of death. Deathblight? Tibia's summons? Deathbird? Had this world's sun also lost its warmth? Ghostfire had chased her through dark nights in other lives. The memory made her skin prickle. The green light swelled. The figure carrying her crumpled, life drained from him. She hit the ground hard. A last warm breath ghosted her cheek. I can't lie here, she thought, panic sharpening her limbs. I have to wake. Footsteps came closer, accompanied by a malicious chuckle and the wheeze of a broken bellows. When Hermione opened her eyes, she saw a sky the color of ink, heavy clouds laced with sickly green filaments, as if the heavens themselves boiled with malice. The land around her was a wasteland, sand, brittle branches, and scattered bodies. They bore no wounds. Their faces were unnaturally peaceful, as if life had simply slipped out of them. Her gaze fell to the body that had cradled her, the bearded man who had held on until the end. Father. The word struck her like a distant bell. In this life, the memory that clung to the body was of two battlefield doctors who had made a home amid ruin. Mr. and Mrs. Granger had kept their child warm and fed as best they could. Even with radioactive dust dimming the sky, there had been light in the child's eyes, until the earth shook and the settlement fell under assault. The invasion arrived in black robes. The settlement's fierce captain was cut down instantly. Explosions shook the place. Fire and steam rifles rose and fell but couldn't touch the robed attackers. In panic, neighbors detonated black powder and flames took the settlement. Her parents fled with her among the crowd, but the black-robed intruders were too fast. People she knew fell like rags. First neighbors, then her mother, then her father. Only she remained. One of the black-robed figures strode toward her, as if toward prey. Even lying still, she could feel that he knew she lived. Hermione forced herself upright. She wore a thick cotton coat, patchworked by her mother's rough but loving hand. A little witch who can't run, the robed man chuckled as he toyed with a dark green rod. He tossed back his hood, revealing the left side of his skull grotesquely swollen, his face slack and drooling. Who are you? Hermione asked. Death, he hissed. Under the Master's guidance, we all transcend death. He babbled and gibbered as if drunk on his own creed. What do you want? She asked again. You have talent, he said, a child with promise, or perhaps I'll take you and savor her death. The tip of his rod gleamed with pale green light. Embrace your destiny, Avada Kedavra. The green light flew straight for her, the kind of killing glare that had emptied the bodies around her. Instinct flared, and she threw out her hand. Carrion retaliation! The Carrion House and the Raya Lucarian Academy had wrenched a form of magic from the stars and moon, spells to deflect and transmute. A complex sigil blossomed in her palm, pouring a fleeting azure light that took the green bolt and unraveled it. In an instant, the lethal force was twisted back upon itself. Above her head, 3 green magic swords coalesced, humming with the same deathly energy. Even a tarnished champion would have struggled to bend it so precisely. The blades struck the black-robed man before he could utter another word. The curse cut him down. The transformed power did not weaken. He died quickly, warmth fleeing his body as if the light had stolen it. Hermione sat frozen, astonished. That was Carrion magic, something she'd only heard of. Why had it awakened in her? A very neat shield charm application, Miss Granger. Apologies for my delay. A voice came from the frost-hung air. A woman in a dark green robe stepped through the mist. She wore a wide-brimmed witch's hat and carried a broom in one hand and a slender wand in the other. Her face was lined and tired but alert. A young wizard's magical outburst formed quite an elegant effect, she said, voice a blend of surprise and relief. Are you a witch? Hermione asked. The robed man had named himself a Death Eater. That much the child had understood. Yes, the woman said. Her robe was sewn with numerous pouches that bulged with unknown contents. I am Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress of Hogwarts, Head of Gryffindor, and your future Transfiguration Professor. Is it a magic academy? Hermione asked, trying to understand this world where wizards and muggles had once been at war. The two souls inside her were knitting together, the witch's destiny, the child's history. In this place, wizarding war had sundered civilization. Nuclear strikes had followed black flames, and creatures called goblins had helped manufacture horrors that destroyed the world. Radioactive dust choked the sky. The sun had become a rumor among survivors. McGonagall's expression hardened. I came as fast as I could to collect you, she said, but the Death Eaters were quicker. So I'm a witch from ordinary people? Hermione asked. Wizards are born of humans, McGonagall replied crisply. Cutting ourselves off from muggles would be unwise. Hermione watched as McGonagall waved her wand. The earth itself rolled and swallowed the dead. The black-robed corpses eddied away into the ground. That was my father, Hermione said, pointing at a raised mound. I'm sorry, McGonagall said gently. Staying here is dangerous. Mutated beasts will come. That your staff? Hermione asked, curious as the woman produced arcs of light from her wand. McGonagall smiled thinly. This is a wand. You will have one too. You said the shield charm made that happen? Hermione pressed. An advanced use of the shield charm, McGonagall explained. Young witches and wizards sometimes have magical outbursts in life or death moments. If fortune allows, they can take the form of an effect similar to a spell. You managed it, but you cannot control it yet. Enroll at Hogwarts, and you'll learn to master a wand and your powers, step by step. The ground trembled again, memories of the earlier attacks snapping the child's attention taut. Are there more Death Eaters? She asked. McGonagall shook her head. No, something else is coming. Look. On the horizon, a hulking shape resolved into form. A castle with 4 giant stone legs, each limb anchoring a Baroque walking foundation. It swayed with the slow, ponderous gait of an old tortoise. Its spires were lit with steady, dim yellow lamps, careworn but alive. Hogwarts was coming, like a walking mausoleum, like an ancient thing risen to protect them. It cut an improbable silhouette against the poisoned sky. 2. Fly to the magic door. It was different. The walking mausoleum was a resting place for soulless demigods, the abandoned children who never became kings or gods, Queen Marika's cast-offs. They could not return to the Erd Tree. The Deathroot's power pushed up from beneath the earth, so they could only sleep in the walking mausoleum, a sanctuary that resisted death even as it was filled with it, lit by a cold, relentless sun. But the castle ahead, though perched on 4 huge legs like everything else here, overflowed with life. Even the cutting wind of the wasteland seemed to avoid it, and from a distance, Hermione felt a wave of warmth wash over her. You'll be safe once we get there, Professor McGonagall said as kindly as she could, though her travel-worn face betrayed little comfort. Get on the broom like this. You'll have special lessons later to learn to fly properly. She held the broom level, clearly long enough to fit 2 without crowding, built no doubt for teachers to ferry students to safety. Hermione said nothing and climbed up obediently. The broom had been charm-enhanced with a cushioning spell. It was softer than she had imagined and supported by an invisible force. McGonagall settled behind her, arms around her, but the professor's bulky robes made Hermione feel a little confined. It's a death-deflecting robe, stuffed with rats, McGonagall said, reading the girl's confusion. It can misdirect the target of a killing curse. Death Eaters love that trick. To be honest, I didn't expect someone your age to be able to reflect one. The broom had already lifted off, steady and fast. The cold outside was blocked by its charm. McGonagall chatted on as they flew. You'll do very well in your studies. I don't know which house you'll be sorted into yet, but study transfiguration thoroughly. Very important. She seemed talkative, as if trying to keep Hermione from dwelling on her parents' deaths. Hermione hesitated. That killing curse, is it very powerful? Avav. McGonagall pursed her lips, reluctant, but began to explain. The killing curse was one of the 3 unforgivable curses decades ago. It was thought to be unblockable. Its terror lies in its simplicity. Even a young wizard who has barely learned magic could use it to kill someone 10 times stronger. An unblockable, instant kill, Hermione murmured. You put it well. McGonagall sighed as the broom cut through the air. But since that war, the taboo around the unforgivables has been broken. Wizards used their power wantonly, enslaving Muggles and even other wizards, and when green flames spread across the land, the killing curse became a symbol. You reflected one, though, Hermione said, puzzled. I don't understand how a child who hasn't even started school could do that. Times have moved on, McGonagall said. I don't like to admit it, but this chaotic world has driven magic forward. There are now countermeasures to the killing curse, Imperius and Cruciatus. She tugged at her robes. Death-deflecting robes, mind-sealing helmets, magical nerve inhibitors, goblins and wizards have developed countless devices to hurt each other. It's not just objects, she continued. The reflection trick I mentioned is an advanced shield charm application developed after the war. A skilled wizard can deflect or even bounce back hostile magic, but the enemy can cast the killing curse 100 times. You cannot afford a single mistake. So reflection is a specialist technique, not something everyone can use? The robes are cheaper, Hermione guessed. Very perceptive. McGonagall's expression softened a little. Dozens of ordinary rats, combined with a simple confundus, will fool most dark wizards. The curse will change target, letting us survive dozens of attacks. The energy saved that way can be decisive on the battlefield. Hermione thought for a moment. It seems the main theme of this world is still war. Magic has been pushed further into killing. It's as cruel as the Forbidden Land. They flew fast. The castle grew larger quickly, and there would be no more time for talk. As they approached, Hermione realized it was larger than a mausoleum, or any mausoleum she could imagine. A towering castle formed only part of a walking mountain. Around it lay flat lawns and huge structures resembling stadiums. As their broom neared, she felt a strange tug, like passing through water or slipping across a seam in space. Her vision briefly warped, as if flattened and then restored. Night was deepening. The castle's outer shape blurred, but at the main gate, a tall figure waited, flanked by a group of children. You've worked hard, Professor McGonagall, the figure said. His voice carried a faint arrogance beneath the politeness. McGonagall landed with Hermione and shot a look of displeasure at him. Lucius, are these all the children? Now Hermione could see him clearly. Immaculate robes, long platinum blonde hair, leaning on a pale staff that gleamed off-white, bone by her growing familiarity with the Forbidden Land's oddities. Lucius gathered about a dozen children around him, his tones slick and superior. Yes, all of them. Professor Sprout and Professor Flitwick brought the rest. They fought fiercely and have gone to rest, he said, then glanced at Hermione behind McGonagall. Is this the last one? He studied Hermione's ragged cotton coat and couldn't hide a sneer. Ah, Muggle-born? McGonagall, mid-scourgify on herself, tore a piece from her robe. She shrugged off her deep green coat and placed it around Hermione as if to protect her, then fixed Lucius with a fierce glare. This is Hogwarts. Do not bring your family prejudices into the school. Lucius bristled, annoyed at being rebuked in front of the children, but he dared not argue with the deputy headmistress. I will take care of these children. Please prepare for the opening feast. McGonagall ruffled Hermione's hair affectionately before handing her over to Lucius. She hurried toward the great hall. The opening feast and hundreds of waiting faces required her attention. All right, children, line up here. The sorting ceremony will begin shortly. Lucius guided them into place with the faintest hint of disdain and nudged Hermione into the line as if to remind her of her place. Hogwarts is a prestigious school of magic with a long history, he lectured. In the 40 years since the war, its preserved magical tomes have made it the last jewel of the magic world. You should be proud to study here." He droned on about Hogwarts' history, but the kids around Hermione had little patience. Neat and radiant, they stood apart from the other group. Children in tattered clothes, dirt on their sleeves, the contrast obvious. The tidy ones were clearly from wizarding families. 3. Branch, if you ask me, this stupid sorting ceremony is meaningless, a well-dressed boy with platinum hair said loudly, his whisper deliberately amplified. From the way he carried himself, Hermione could tell he was Professor Malfoy's son, and she was surprised to see him starting school the same year. He glanced around, even staring at Hermione with a superior air. "My father said that decades ago dozens of new students enrolled each year, sometimes over 100. With so many, sorting made sense," he boasted. "Now there are at most a dozen new students a year, only a few for each house. One year, Ravenclaw didn't even get a single new student." The nearby Muggle-born children echoed, "Oh," even though most of them had no idea what Ravenclaw meant. Lucius Malfoy, standing nearby, flinched. "Draco, shut up," he snapped, scanning the assembled children. "Have I taught you nothing at home? Are you so pleased with yourself that mudbloods flatter you?" Draco pouted, but kept speaking. "If you ask me, there should only be 2 houses, purebloods and Muggles. That would be enough." A boy with dark brown hair and striking blue-green eyes laughed at Draco's discomfort. He was neatly dressed, clearly from a wizarding family. "Harry Potter, I know you," he called. Draco sneered at him. "Perhaps your potion professor mother gave you too many draughts, so you've lost your manners," he sniffed, adding, "My father is the Dean of Slytherin." "So you little snake must have eaten a lot of dead rats, right?" A freckled red-headed boy interjected, and Harry and several other wizard children burst out laughing. Hermione watched all of it and thought, not even the divisions inside wizarding families have softened. Draco reddened with anger but dared not strike. Lucius finished a long, proud speech. 4 houses, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, and the proud Slytherin, each with their own merits. I wish you good luck. The doors were pushed open from the inside. Professor McGonagall, newly arranged, poked her head through and gave Lucius a signal to bring the children in. Everyone filed in and took their places. Hundreds of candles floated above the great hall, and the ceiling showed a brilliant starry sky. Hermione could tell it was illusions. Outside, the real sky was heavy with dark clouds. The long tables were only sparsely filled, 100 or 200 students in total, robes black save for collars and trim in each house's colors. At the head table, a row of high-backed chairs waited. Lucius took his seat among them. The central highest chair was empty, except for a large red phoenix perched listlessly on its back. In the center of the hall, a stool sat beside Professor McGonagall, and a battered wizard's hat rested on it. "Those whose names I call, please come forward," she said. "Hannah Abbott." The sorting by a hat was a new experience for Hermione. The first few children barely took any time, and then it was her turn. "Hermione Granger," she heard someone behind her mutter, "Mudblood." Malice in the voice, likely one of Draco's cronies. Hermione stepped forward and sat on the stool. Professor McGonagall gave her an encouraging nod and placed the hat over her eyes. "Ah, a little one," the hat murmured in her mind. Hermione considered, amusement flickering inwardly. "Is it trying legilimency?" "Not legilimency, child. The founders did not give me that power," the hat replied. "I can only see the qualities within you and sort according to them." "How do you know I was thinking about legilimency?" Hermione thought, confronting it. "Just a little surface probing," the hat admitted dryly. "You are clever, and you work well within a group, and you have astonishing courage, but you lack the ambition to push yourself forward. Oh, you are far too mature to be a child." Hermione's thoughts drifted as the hat spoke. She had become a finger witch more by accident than design. She had picked up the knowledge a tarnished might know, and had, in her way, helped others reach for the title of Elden Lord, mostly by reacting to events rather than seeking them. Her original goal had been simple, to save her already broken little family. She had never aimed to become someone like Queen Marika. The Sorting Hat considered and then said, "You have a sharp mind. Ravenclaw would suit you. But there is courage buried deep inside, courage that should be set alight. Go to Gryffindor." "Gryffindor," the hat announced aloud. Professor McGonagall smiled approvingly, and the Gryffindor table, red collars, applauded and welcomed their new student. Hermione took a seat on the somewhat empty table and chewed on the hat's words. Before long, a dozen new students had been sorted. Harry Potter and the quick-tempered redhead came over and introduced themselves. This year's intake was balanced. Each house had received a fair share of the new children. The phoenix stirred, flew down from the head table, and alighted on the podium. "I am the principal of Hogwarts, Dumbledore." The bird's sharp beak moved, and an old man's voice echoed through the hall. "The principal is a bird?" Hermione blurted, surprised. "No, that's the headmaster's phoenix," Harry explained. "Headmaster Dumbledore is the greatest white wizard alive. There are too many matters for him to handle in person, so he often attends through his phoenix. I heard there was fiend fire in Old Paris again, killing dozens of wizards regardless of alignment, and no one could quench it." "Dumbledore is probably dealing with that now," Ron said. "But there are saints giving them trouble, and the situation in the Scottish Highlands bears his attention most of all. After all, that's where Hogwarts was founded. It's another school year, and I'm pleased a dozen more young witches and wizards have come to Hogwarts," the Phoenix continued in a steady old voice. "Before term begins, a few warnings." The bird paused. "The corridor on the right-hand side of the 4th floor is forbidden. Anyone who values their life should not approach it. The selection of wands for new students will take place the day after tomorrow. Until then, the deans of each house will provide preliminary training." With that, the Phoenix returned to its chair, and suddenly luxurious food appeared before every student. Hermione's stomach tugged. Wands could wait. She watched the plates and reached for something to eat. She tore at a plump rat leg, rough but roasted and brushed with honey and spices, its scent surprisingly appetizing. 40 years after the war, food was scarce. Rats and cockroaches were often the easiest way to get meat. Those who refused to eat what was available found themselves going hungry. 4. You should have your own magic wand. After the banquet, the prefects shepherded the students back to their dormitories. With so many fewer pupils now, everyone could have roomy single rooms instead of being crammed together. Hermione, who had narrowly escaped death, finally had a chance to lie down and rest. She touched the thick blanket and the soft pillow. A fresh school uniform lay folded nearby. For a moment, everything felt cut off from the wasteland beyond the castle. Hogwarts still moved on, steady and slow, and inside its walls there was almost no jolt, only a gentle sway, like being rocked in a mother's arms. Radiation dust and the cold wind were kept out. The castle had become, truly, the last refuge in the apocalypse. But why had she been able to cast carrion retaliation? Now that she had time to think, the question came back to her. When the killing curse fell, her body had frozen at the approach of death. It was an instinct from her soul that had let her reach for Kalia's high-level magic. She closed her eyes and let her spirit sink toward the depths of her consciousness. As a finger witch, when she'd been in the Forbidden Lands, she had often prayed to the two fingers like this. The devout's hearts connect to their deities. But this world had no supreme will to bow to, and Hermione no longer wished to be a puppet. Her heart would belong only to herself. Her inner spiritual landscape was a dark green, the color of the sky outside and the light that had come before her parents' death. She saw the little cave settlement, the faint bonfire, roasted cockroaches cooked without salt. The simplest things were the most delicious memories. She sank deeper, returning to herself as a finger witch. She saw graveyards heaped with limbs, plains of rot, knights and sorcerers slashing at one another across mountains and lakes, and shambling corpses wandering the golden plateau. At last she saw the burning Erd tree, ash choking the sky, and a huge full moon rising. It was her Tarnished, so time had already reached its end. The Tarnished, even without her, had ushered in a new age. Under the full moon, a deep voice spoke. "If possible, I would give all the magic to my unfamiliar witch. It was her expectation that brought me here." They had never met, but Hermione knew at once that the speaker was her Tarnished. The blue divine figure beneath the moon inclined its head, and a shaft of light shot out from the frosty orb. The vision closed. A river of magic flowed into her soul from another dimension. Shining stone magic, moon magic, night magic, frost, flame, sin, frenzied flame, beast, death, dragon communion, gravity, crystallization, decay, golden order, blood. Not only spells, but also incantations, and even some combat arts traveled to Hermione along that moon river. This was not the grace of the Moon Princess Ranny, but the cache of powers the Tarnished had collected on his path to kingship. He had remembered her, that faithful warrior who had fought with twin bleeding blades and carved his way to the end. For her sake, he had learned every spell and uttered every incantation. Hermione smiled softly in the dream. The night slipped away. When she woke, those spells were branded into her mind. Yet magic awakens differently from world to world. Star and moon-related spells, gravity and cold magics aligned quickly, but those tied to the Forbidden Land's supreme wills could not be summoned here yet. The Golden Order, the Frenzied Flame, the Black Flame that hunts deities, the Scarlet Rot, even the power brought by Dragon Communion, these were stagnant waters from a source that did not exist here. Hermione retained the knowledge of all of them, though. If she could find corresponding mechanisms in this world, she knew she could reproduce their effects. Because a dust cloud hid the sun that morning, Hogwarts woke to clusters of candles being lit. The candles were enchanted. When they burned down, they regrew from the candlesticks at night and would burn again the next day. Breakfast in the Great Hall was quieter than the banquet had been, but there was fresh white bread, cockroach milk, and eggs. A slab of pressed ham, made from leftover scraps, had a surprising variety of texture. Hermione ate with relish. From across the hall, she caught sight of Malfoy at the Slytherin table, the platinum-haired boy sniffing his cup of cockroach milk with an expression of disgust, as if he might be sick. Harry and Ron, perhaps because they and Hermione were the only 3 new Gryffindors that year, stuck close to her and peppered her with questions about Muggles. "Have you never been outside?" Hermione asked. "Only on rare outings to pass a Muggle settlement," Harry said with a shrug. "Most of us live underground or in caves. There's really nothing to see." "I begged Dad to take me to a Muggle city once," Ron said through a mouthful of toast, "but he said it's too dangerous. Full of dark wizards, crazy Muggle fighters, and goblins." He mimed his father in a dramatic whisper. "Those goblins cooperate with Muggles to develop pneumatic rifles that can punch through the shield charm. Even if you hide behind me, you'd get shot in the head." He demonstrated how he believed it would happen. "Do you hate Muggles?" Hermione asked. She'd assumed, like many wizarding children, that wizards were naturally opposed to Muggles. She was Muggle-born herself. After all, Harry shook his head. "Mum says wizards and Muggles should be compatriots, not enemies. Without new wizards cropping up among Muggles, pureblood families would just die out from inbreeding. Anyone who's studied a bit of history knows how awful inbreeding is. Only someone whose brain had been sat on by a troll would believe in pureblood superiority." "That's a professor I can respect," Hermione smiled. The idea that Hogwarts' staff, aside from Lucius, weren't prejudiced against Muggle-borns finished winning her over. Ron shoved the last of his egg white down and grimaced as he forced the dry yolk down with it. "Lucius?" Hermione asked. "He's the exception," Ron said. "Most of the professors aren't like that, and Harry's mum's in the Order of the Phoenix." He said it with pride. "Order of the Phoenix?" Hermione echoed. "It's an organization Dumbledore started to fight evil," Harry explained. "We help anyone in need, Muggles, wizards, goblins. And if we run into dark wizards, bad goblins, or Muggle soldiers trying to do harm, we don't just stand there." Ron threw up what he thought was a cool spell-casting pose, then immediately started coughing on his egg yolk. Hermione thought he looked like a red-haired mountain baboon for a moment and wondered if any of those still existed. "What about the head of Slytherin?" she asked. "What does he teach?" Harry patted Ron to help him breathe. "He teaches reversal of anti-wizard techniques. Basically dark arts, Muggle technology, goblin magic, mutated beasts, everything that can hurt wizards." "You should be careful," Ron warned. "My brother said he once used a Muggle-born student to demonstrate dark arts in front of the class. Dumbledore was furious, almost sent a phoenix to burn him to death." "I'll be careful," Hermione said, nodding. "He probably won't dare to do anything like that again." She wasn't yet able to cast high-level spells at will, but if the situation became life or death, she felt certain she could unleash something like a rotting dragon communion at close range. "Speaking of which, what exactly is wand selection?" Hermione asked. Ron fumbled in his pocket and pulled out an old wand, looking embarrassed. Actually, I probably won't take part in wand selection with you lot. Mum gave me Charlie's old wand. Is wand selection dangerous? Hermione asked, piecing together what that might mean. If it weren't risky, families wouldn't hand down old wands. Harry explained. Before the war, wands could be bought in shops. You could just buy one. But the war shattered Diagon Alley in London. Shops that had been around since ages past were gone. Famous wand makers were killed, too, assassinated in a joint effort by goblins and muggles who'd figured out the wizards' weak points. Goblins had once been forbidden use of wands by wizards, so they wanted revenge. Ron added, my parents' generation still scavenged wands left behind by earlier witches and wizards. They weren't always easy to use, but they were works of craftsmanship. Now the few people making traditional wands are imitators, Harry said. Their wands aren't nearly as good. As the war dragged on, the old wands ran out, Ron said. If later students don't want to use clumsy standard wands, they have to find materials themselves and make their own. Find them themselves? Hermione repeated. Harry nodded. Wand selection is when Hogwarts picks a place that's not too dangerous but rich in materials and lets the young witches and wizards gather what suits them. 5. The magic of pouring. Are you sure we'll find anything? Hermione thought it was absurd, sending a group of 11-year-olds to rummage for useful scraps in a war-ravaged, frozen wasteland, all while having to keep watch for danger. Even if the dark wizards, muggle fighters, goblins, and mutated beasts had been driven off, these children hadn't even mastered their magic yet. They could barely handle the giant roast rat at the opening feast. If we don't find anything, we'll just try again next year, Harry said, sounding nonchalant. Not having a wand just means you're at the back of the class for a year. You can still scrape through exams with some gestural spells. Then next year, you can join the new students and try again. Or, his eyes shone with the sort of bright, obedient Gryffindor curiosity that loved an adventure. Hermione suspected he might be hoping to fail on purpose so he could go on the trip again. Or you could beg your mum to buy you a cheap temporary one, Ron offered, scratching his head. But that only worked if one of your parents was a wizard. Muggle-born kids who weren't orphans were already rare. Where would they get the galleons for a wand? Harry, I swear, if you do that on purpose, your mum will put you in a cauldron and boil you, Ron added. If you're desperate, you could pick up dead branches or bones to make up the numbers. But everyone's responsible for themselves. Making your own wand, Harry said, had one advantage. Young wizards' inspired choices often worked out well. The materials they found might be odd, but the finished wand would be the one that suited them best. Especially after years of breaking it in, a rough homemade wand could be more effective than an inherited masterpiece. George and Fred didn't use old wands. They found good stuff on the Normandy beaches, Ron grumbled. Why didn't Mum let me go? I'd do better than them. After breakfast, while Ron's complaints continued, Hermione and Harry walked to Professor McGonagall's office for their wand-making instruction. Ron was on holiday until first year officially began. Although only 2 Gryffindors needed the briefing, McGonagall cleared an empty classroom for them. A wand has 2 parts, the body and the core, she said, tapping the blackboard and projecting a diagram of a traditional wand. She held up her own wand for them to study. The body conducts magic. Different materials suit different people. The body is where wands vary the most. She traced a circle in the air. A faint yellow light made the wooden wand translucent, revealing the thin core inside. This one of mine is an Ollivander relic. Fir wood, dragon heartstring, 9.5 inches, unyielding. She spoke the description like a cherished phrase. Far is a resilient wood. Wands of 4 need an owner of endurance and strong will. In the hands of someone fickle, they'll be useless. While McGonagall talked, Harry whispered to Hermione, Fir wands are especially good for transfiguration. They suit people who are focused, opinionated, and occasionally assertive. That's why McGonagall was one of the last registered animagi before the ministry fell. She turns into a tabby cat, Mum said. Mr. Potter, you have clearly read many compendia on wand materials at home, but that is no excuse for distracting your classmates, McGonagall snapped. The traditional British cores are unicorn hair, dragon heartstring, and phoenix feather. but they are not the only possible cores. She paused. Unicorns were declared extinct 15 years ago, so you won't find any living ones anyway. She looked at them more gently. I'm not having you learn all this by rote. I want your imaginations to develop an instinct. Once you know the basics of wand making, your inspiration will guide you to the body and core that are right for you. Inclination? Hermione asked, puzzled. Something like a leaning towards certain kinds of magic, how you instinctively cast, Harry offered. He had a lot of theoretical knowledge, but had only actually learned a few simple gestural spells. Where will we be looking for wand materials? Hermione asked. They had to know where the exam would be held. McGonagall looked out the window and sighed. The Soviet territories, Pripyat, Chernobyl. Harry's breath caught. Hermione looked at him without understanding. After the war, the Soviets pushed harder into nuclear weapons. With Goblin help, they built a huge plant. Chernobyl, Harry explained. A few years ago, when I was 6, that plant blew. I heard the city was destroyed. Surviving Muggles, well, it was terrible. Even wizards and goblins have needed potions to survive that area ever since. Professor, are we really going there? Harry asked. Dumbledore will clear most of the radiation, McGonagall said gravely. What remains won't harm you as witches and wizards. The professors will rid the area of any other dangerous elements. You will search only within a designated safe zone. When the lesson ended, Hermione and Harry walked back to the common room. Mutated trees, the bones of dead mutated beasts, goblin alloy forged by goblins and muggles. If we're lucky, we might even find wands of dead wizards. In that light, it makes sense Dumbledore put the wand selection there, Harry said, watching the moving staircase underfoot. Can Hogwarts travel anywhere? Hermione asked, careful with her footing. Like all countries? Of course, Dumbledore is the greatest white wizard, Harry said proudly. But he's still lost to the Dark Lord, a sharp voice cut in. Malfoy and his friends had just finished their own session. Draco wore his usual smug look. I didn't think you'd dare join the wand selection, Potter. I thought you'd have your father, or your mum, get you some scrap of wand, he sneered. Harry bristled. Go on. Show off your has-been connections. I hope you and the mudblood behind you don't wet yourselves in Chernobyl. Malfoy spat the last word with vicious relish, glancing at Hermione before striding away. Don't the professors do anything about that? Hermione asked, bewildered. Is mudblood that terrible a word? They used to, Harry said, pursing his lips. The two of them walked back into the common room in silence, their earlier eagerness dampened by the insult and the knowledge of what lay ahead. 6. Chernobyl time passed quickly. That night, Hermione sat on her bed, bathed in the pale wash of light spilling down from the tower window. Dumbledore liked to leave the moon to keep the younger students company. Her long brown hair fanned across the pillow. She was curled up in her pajamas like a small, fluffy ball. In her open palm, a flickering blue light pulsed unsteadily. The power of the Philosopher's Stone. With wand selection scheduled for the next day, she had begun practicing the magic that the Tarnished had transmitted to her as soon as she returned to the dormitory. The most basic of those spells was Shining Stone Pebbles, a piece of common wizardry that launched little magical pebbles to strike an enemy, the sort of starting spell every traveler in the Forbidden Land learned. Shining Stone magic itself came from the stars. The so-called Philosopher's Stone was amber made of fallen starlight. After General Radon, the Star Scourge sealed the sky. Stars were visible in only a few places in the Forbidden Land. The star power that had once been abundant had begun to fade. The stargazers gathered in Liurnia of the Lakes, the only place with a clear, starry sky, and founded the Academy of Raya Lucaria to preserve their craft. To channel the magic reliably, wizards wore items carved from the Philosopher's Stone on their staves or bodies. Even Full Moon Queen Renala, who ruled the Academy and suppressed the stargazers with moon magic, had Kalia's Blue, a flawless Philosopher's Stone, set into her scepter to symbolize royal authority. The Philosopher's Stone was not harmless. Ordinary people suffered bodily decline from prolonged exposure to starlight, and the stargazers who pursued the stars eventually became half-human, half-Philosopher's Stone creatures, though generally only Origin-level wizards reached that point. There were still stars in this world, even if they hadn't been seen for years. If there were no Philosopher's Stones at all, Hermione thought, the spell should be utterly impossible. This half-formed effect didn't make sense. She already knew shining stone pebbles even before the Tarnished had taught her most of the theory. Proficiency wasn't the problem. She tried a simpler, related spell. Starlight, a small floating star of pale blue rose above her head and cast a soft glow through the dormitory. Starlight was the kind of basic spell travelers used to light their way in starless nights, unlit caverns, or prison cells, little motes of light that moved with the caster. That this spell worked pointed to only one conclusion. The air itself was suffused with star power. Outside the window, the sky was a smear of dust and cloud, but faint green pinpricks of light tumbled through the thick haze. Maybe the fallout here wasn't as complete as Rodon's gravity magic, she thought. Or perhaps the goblins' winter curse, their nuclear weapons, had something to do with the Philosopher's Stone's lingering influence. If star power still existed at anything like this level, shining stone magic in this world might be effectively dead, but stars had to have fallen somewhere. There might be Philosopher's Stone deposits to mine. She remembered the miners' techniques from the crystal tunnels. Maybe she'd have to learn something crude like Cragshard or pick up a sensible melee style. Carrion Swiftblade was good and affordable. There was the temptation of Bloodlord Moog's blood magic too, but summoning the Formless Mother was an invitation to suffering, best avoided. Lost in those half-planned strategies, she finally fell asleep. The next day, the hovering Hogwarts reached its destination, the ruined site of the Chernobyl reactor. From afar, the square concrete building showed a massive hole blown open at its top, and inside the breach a twisted, platinum-glowing framework of goblin metal glinted. Even a nuclear blast that had shattered thick, reinforced concrete hadn't entirely destroyed goblin work. It was mangled and warped, its enchantments twisted into something cursed and lethally radioactive. What had once been a nuclear power plant now looked more like a fortified military town. Guard posts, rows of small residences, and a central plaza, its former prosperity visible even through the collapse and frost. Hermione wondered aloud whether Muggles could have developed nuclear power without goblin help. She and the other students chosen for wand selection had dressed for the ordeal and packed a few days' worth of jerky and cockroach milk. They gathered in Hogwarts's courtyard. Apart from a few like Ron, most of the first years had elected to take part in the expedition. 2 second years lingered among the crowd, trying not to draw the attention of the youngest students. "I suppose they could," Harry said hesitantly. "But maybe not so soon. The Dark Lord claimed Muggles would eventually master weapons that could destroy the world, which is why he wanted war early." Professor McGonagall's face was grim as she paced in front of the group of a dozen or so children. As the castle drew nearer to the ruins, the high radiation made the barrier shimmer with a misty, luminous haze, at once dangerous and strangely beautiful. The magical ward could not entirely block the radiation. For a moment, everyone felt as if the air itself were burning, but Dumbledore, at the heart of the castle's protections, used some unknown magic, and the discomfort vanished. Hogwarts hovered above the ruins and then settled down with a great roar. The underside of the castle, like an inverted mountain, pressed over the most dangerous core, and an invisible humming field cut off the reactor's ongoing emissions. "Professor Dumbledore will take full control of the reactor's power," McGonagall announced. "The professors will spread out to clear surrounding hazards. Your task is to search the ruins for anything that could potentially be useful material. Many items were ejected from the reactor. What you find will depend on your inclination." Thanks to Dumbledore's wards, Hermione felt no ill effects from the radiation. The school would not send first years to their deaths. McGonagall's gaze swept past the Gryffindors. Then she continued, "You have 1 day only. If you encounter danger, blow the whistle we gave you. The nearest professor will get to you as quickly as possible." The other professors arrived with brooms at the ready. Hermione saw Harry's mother, now a potions professor, among them. Harry inherited her eyes. "Everyone choose a direction. We'll bring you down. Do not group together. There is enough space for you to find your own wands. Do not fight over items." Lucius made a loud show of asserting himself. Harry pointed to a nearby half-collapsed structure that had once been a guard post, its black char and rime-streaked scorches still visible. "I want to go there," he said. "Inclination," came the call. Inclination! Hermione searched through the crowd for whatever her inclination might point to. Many students had already taken their directions and vanished under the castle. Across the way, she noticed a stand of withered trees, flattened by the blast and killed by radiation months ago, black branches jutting up from the snow. Even now, it was possible to see that before the disaster, it had been an arranged ecological garden. Goblins might not help rebuild Muggle civilization, but they could construct small managed gardens. There was an ugly irony in it. Goblins who had incited hatred and helped unleash the winter curse now offered post-disaster aid as if they bore no responsibility. "Professor, I want to go there," Hermione told McGonagall, pointing toward the dead grove. McGonagall nodded and settled Hermione onto a broom. Harry mounted his mother's broom, and the two of them flew off in different directions, waving to one another through the icy wind and calling good luck. Ron watched from the courtyard, bundled and uncertain, as the students dispersed into the radioactive ruins. 7. A noble who craves power. Be careful. If you run into danger, blow the whistle. I'll come as fast as I can. Professor McGonagall set Hermione at the edge of the withered woods and sat on her broom, giving instructions. Although few people dared enter this place before Dumbledore cleansed it, the professors can't let their guard down. We'll patrol nearby until all the students are back in the castle. She said it and lifted into the sky. Hermione watched her go, then stepped slowly into the trees. She wore the standard Gryffindor robe. Its enchantments kept the cold from bothering her. A small satchel hung at her hip. Alongside food and water, it held a short, blunt dagger, more for cutting brush than killing, and clutched in her hand the whistle McGonagall had given her, ready to call for help. Even the mutated beasts that had once terrorized the area couldn't survive here anymore. This place had been poisoned twice, a true dead zone until Dumbledore bound the remaining Radion magic. Wizards could move through it unharmed. Thanks to those protections, an 11-year-old girl could walk these poisoned groves too. The forest itself was small. Years of wind and frost had shattered most trees. Their highest branches barely reached 2 meters. The trunks were brittle, breaking to dust underfoot, but that didn't slow Hermione. She let the strange tug she'd felt earlier, the tendency, a concept as mysterious as the magic that wove through the land, guide her. She didn't know precisely where she was going, only that she should go. All around were relics of a different war. Guns, skeletons, tattered uniforms, Muggle things left to rot. The wands she had hoped to find were nowhere to be seen. The skeletal remains were the oddest, small, gaunt, some with features that were almost, but not quite, human. One skeleton, smaller than Hermione and dressed in a beret and a fitted Soviet-style uniform, caught her eye. Its bones faintly glowed, like pale jade in the dim light, both beautiful and eerie. "They must have taken a lot of radiation while they were alive," she murmured to herself. Radiation does things. Before she could step closer, something whistled past from behind. Wingardium Leviosa. Because she had died in her previous life, she'd learned to roll, to dodge. Hermione rolled aside just before the invisible force hit, but she was a hair too late. The whistle in her hand was grazed and spun out of her grip, sailing dozens of meters away. Tsk, what a slippery little thing. The voice was familiar, irritating. Malfoy. Hermione was up in an instant. Draco stood a short distance away, relief and malice carved into his features. He gripped a dagger in his right hand. His left was held flat with 3 fingers pointed forward, the same hand gesture spell that had just been used. "Your father told you not to gather, didn't he?" Hermione said without expression. "If everyone gathers together, how are you going to make a move?" Malfoy laughed. "Don't even try to pick up the whistle. I don't believe you can dodge the next one." Hermione studied him. He looked rushed, hurrying to teach a mudblood a lesson because you haven't found suitable materials yet, she asked, making it sound like a mild curiosity. Draco, sensing he had the advantage, began to gloat. Only Dumbledore's fools would trust in silly wand selection. How could anything dug out of these junkyards be fit for the heir of House Malfoy? He sneered at her. The best wand materials have never been from magical beasts. Something clicked in Hermione's mind. Compared to unicorns, phoenixes, and dragons, a wizard himself, his bones, his essence, could be the most potent source. No wonder Draco had looked at her like that yesterday. She had thought the boy merely arrogant, precocious. Now she understood he had been considering part of her as raw material. "Did your father tell you to do this?" she asked, her gaze turning cold. For a moment, panic flashed across Draco's face, then he smoothed it away. "Malfoy Manor is like this," he blurted. Among the remaining 28 pureblood families, except for a few traitors, those who still understand honor have taken to making wands from human bone. Hermione remembered Lucius Malfoy's bone staff. The pieces fell into place. Draco swallowed, trying to hide his excitement and nerves. The hand bone cut off in the cry of a young wizard's first loss, pulled from the duel's loser, the tongue ripped out in anguish, glued with tears. "That's the proper material." He forced his voice to harden. "Stop struggling. You don't know much magic. I'll only cut off your left hand and your tongue. If you blow the whistle, a professor will come. Hogwarts can mend you in 2 weeks. You can try again next year." Hermione's eyes narrowed. "Aren't you and your father afraid of Dumbledore's wrath?" Draco laughed, the sound brittle with confidence. "Hogwarts can't run without Malfoy Manor. Where do you think their supplies come from? Food, clothing, cauldrons, parchment. Dumbledore may be angry, but no student dies. Time soothes everything. Father might get a slap on the wrist, if that." She thought of every child corrupted by an environment of ease and cruelty, of those citizens of the Forbidden Land, those who once claimed divine sight, turned to walking corpses the moment laws broke down. Humanity wasn't immutable. A rotten world made rotten people. How lucky, Hermione thought, was a child who grew up seeing light. "Why pick me?" she asked. "Muggle-borns make up more than half the new students, don't they?" Draco advanced with the dagger. Hermione's face gave nothing away. She sounded almost resigned. "Father overheard McGonagall and Sprout talking. You reflected a killing curse. You're the most talented in this year's cohort." Nervous sweat beaded on his forehead. Whether from excitement, cold, or fear, his body trembled. "I deserve the best." He lunged. The dagger wasn't aimed for a lethal strike, just to pin her while he cut. He was clumsy in close quarters, untrained in proper combat. Hermione hopped back, then pushed, and he nearly toppled. "One last question," she said softly, a hint of pity in her voice. "Have you ever been afraid?" Draco, flushed with fury, scrambled up and charged again. "You've made me angry." This time his left hand formed the three-fingered gesture. "Wingardium Leviosa." The invisible force surged out, but Hermione was ready. She sidestepped it easily. Her brown eyes were hard as ice. She lifted her palm, and a cool blue light gathered there, the strange, starry power she could call upon. Shining stone pebbles. The light flashed and vanished. Draco flew backward, landing hard among the brittle trunks and dust. He lay sprawled, winded and stunned, while Hermione stood over him, whistle still lost somewhere in the ruined forest, and the cold, careful hush of the Forbidden Land settled around them. 8. Limb Cemetery. At that moment, Hermione understood the essence of the Philosopher's Stone. Radiation. More than 40 years had passed since the war, and even with the spread of goblin magic, the average radiation level across the continent had fallen to what ordinary people could tolerate. Hogwarts itself was much safer. That was why shining stone magic could not be cast carelessly anywhere, until here. Chernobyl, even under Dumbledore's suppression, still held Muggle-dangerous levels of radiation. It was a paradise for shining stone magic. A single strike here would be devastating without killing outright. Hermione stood motionless, easing the blue light from her hand. She watched indifferently as Malfoy, or the boy who had tried to cut off her hand, struggled to his knees. His face was contorted. He vomited onto the ground, retching. "Even for someone born a wizard, this amount of radiation inside the body is dangerous," she said coldly. "If you don't get proper treatment fast, you won't necessarily die, but you'll be horribly deformed." She felt little mercy for someone who had tried to maim her for cruelty's sake, even a child. Still, she gave him a chance, if only for the flash of fear that had crossed his features when he'd done it. "You'll live at least half a day," she added. "You can blow the whistle now, and your foul father can come fetch you. Or you can use that half day to dig your wand out of the trash heap you despise and finish your wand selection." Let's see if a Slytherin truly deserves whatever pride you cling to." She turned away, no longer looking at the pale, trembling boy. Behind her, the sounds of a clumsy retreat mixed with faint whimpers, like wind scraping over dry branches. Hermione almost smiled bitterly. How like Stormvale it was, a graveyard of limbs, nobles who fused others' parts onto themselves to manufacture glory, a grafted king presiding over talentless aristocrats who thought borrowed flesh could make them great. The forest was silent again, save for the snap of her boots on twigs. Following the pull of her tendency, that strange guiding instinct, Hermione wound deeper and deeper through the trees until the woods opened. In the midst of the dead, gray forest, a small patch of vivid green stunned her. Tenacious weeds had broken through the frozen soil, shocking in their color. Around the patch, a ring of wind seemed to hold the gloom at bay, forming a faint barrier that hid the scene from the outside world. At the center of that green, on less than 50 square meters, stood an altar built from the remains of a unicorn and a scattering of other magical creatures. Firefly-like points of green light hovered among the bones. Sapling-thin insects, mole-like burrowers, big-eyed ponies, gaudily feathered owls, fluffy furballs, rotwood crocodiles, sleek large cats, and scrawny bat horses. One by one, they stood frozen in poses that suggested chase or defense, their residual magic purifying the radiation and seeding life into that small ring of soil. At the altar's highest point, a unicorn's skeleton remained shockingly intact, pure white, its fur smoothed as if it still breathed. Its head was thrown up, as if braying to the sky, but a slender metal rod had pierced its chest, and terrible scorch marks rippled outward. Had the animals died protecting that rod? Behind the pile of carcasses, the answer grew clearer and darker. Human and goblin skeletons lay scattered as if still locked in battle. The dead had not found a victor, even by the time the blast and radiation finished them. Hermione stared. What happened here? There was no one to answer. Perhaps she should ask someone who had been involved. Judging by the positions and states of the corpses, she chose one that had fallen alongside the beasts. It didn't look like a muggle or goblin. It seemed more likely to be a wizard, and therefore less likely to attack if roused. She raised her voice and called the name of an old, forbidding rite. Tibia's Summons. Tibia's Summons. Magic used by those who served death. In ages before the Golden Tree Law, a ferryman named Tibia guided the dead. Their spirits boarded his boat and crossed to the afterlife, where the blazing candle tree and the deathbirds tended them to eternal rest. Death was a constant across worlds, and Hermione still had access to Forbidden Land magics that could reach into that other realm. The spell was difficult, but the abundance of death about her offered raw material. She gathered suitable bones from the piles, ritual implements, and chanted. Silent ripples moved from her lips, vibrating the bones. Soon a dark green, translucent shape lifted from the remains, a ghost, unsteady as a candle flame in wind. It paid no attention to the girl who had called it. It existed as if still in the throes of combat. Hermione frowned. The conjuration had been imperfect. Her power in this kind of work was limited. She could not summon a steady, physical skeleton, only this fragile apparition. The ghost took the shape of a man in wizarding robes, his long hair plastered by the agony of his last moments. He spoke, voice ragged. "Quick! Go! Don't let them take back the control rod." He gestured frantically, as if casting a ward. From his words, Hermione felt the urgency and terror of that final battle. She pressed on with the uneven ritual and asked, "What is the control rod?" The ghost, killed by massive radiation, answered in a flat voice, "Goblin core metal, made by goblins and muggles together. It controls the reactor's reaction rate." "And who are you?" Hermione asked. The apparition wavered. "A wizard who sided with the muggles and goblins. My wand was confiscated. They made me Hufflepuff refuse, a garden caretaker." Hermione recognized the profile, an older wizard, kind to muggles, likely relegated to tending flora and beasts. She must have come to help and instead been assigned menial work. "You stole the control rod?" she asked. "It was me and my friends," the ghost said, and his voice rose in a bitter chorus of remembered companions. Thestral Lena, Kneasel Peter, Bowtruckle George, and the last unicorn the world, Puff. "Muggles and goblins don't want peace," he wailed. "They want to destroy wizards. Like the magical creatures, I was just an exhibit in their ecological garden." They'll kill every living magical creature and wizard who isn't for display, leave only specimens to be shown. The spirit flickered, consumed by grief. We meant to stop them. So you plan to steal the control rod? Hermione prompted. It was the Wezingamot who brought us in, the ghost spat. Roger's people infiltrated and contacted us. There are 7 control rods. We took responsibility for one. They got the rest. The picture fell into place. Raugyre's faction, Grindelwald's adherents and allies, were still working on the land. They had conspired from inside and out, breached Muggle and Goblin defenses, seized the control rods that regulated the reactor, and ultimately caused Chernobyl's devastation. Hermione's eyes went to the rod that lay embedded in the altar, the silvery, strange metal still humming with a faint, unnatural light. Goblin core metal. She touched it with the tip of her wand, feeling the residue of the altar's magic. Is this my tendency? She wondered inwardly, the instinct that had led her here answered by the rod itself. The dark green ghost could not hold together any longer and dissolved into the air. Hermione climbed carefully onto the pyramid of bones and, bracing herself, tugged the control rod free. It came out with a sickening rattle and left the forest strangely quieter, as if it had been holding its breath all along. 9. Hellcore metal. The moment she pulled it free, an image flashed before Hermione's eyes, a blistering forge, molten red iron coursing through channels, dusty Muggle workers hauling carts of ore like walking husks. In that hyper-industrial plant, countless metal parts were made and assembled into weapons, pushed out from underground wagons, passed through layers of checkpoints, and shipped to every corner of the nuclear facility. Deep in a bunker, people in white coats crowded around a strangely gleaming furnace, marveling at a raw stone that threw off a magnificent light. Shirtless goblins, hammers in hand, beat on heated metal amid magma and flame. The clang of metal resonated through the great hall. Sparks flew. Wondrous enchantments and cold science crystallized together. Dark incantations rose and fell, and amid quarrels between scientists and goblins, a metal rod took shape. It was over 1.5 meters long, far taller than Hermione, and entirely silver, though in dim light its surface shimmered with a subtle iridescence that made it both dangerous and beautiful. Prolonged exposure to the reactor had left the rod strongly radioactive. Even without a philosopher's stone, Hermione guessed it could release a large amount of shining stone magic. It would need runes and control circles engraved later, or it would be a portable radiation source wherever it went. The lower end of the rod seemed to be attached to something else. Hermione gave it a hard tug and heard a soft snap as something was pulled free, root and all. A thin, long, root-like stem came away, like a blood vessel with many finer branches. The instant it was removed, the altar made of dead magical creatures lost its glow. The floating motes of light faded. Lush green grass withered back, as if years of life had been drained in a moment. Is this my wand core? The thought came to her. She realized this was a naturally formed wand in the truest sense. If no one had disturbed the altar, if those root-like tendrils had been allowed to grow into the goblin metal, perhaps thousands of years hence, a lucky young wizard would have discovered a complete invincible wand. These roots were the essences of dead magical creatures. Their heartstrings, a dragon's heartstring, a unicorn's tail hair, a thestral's feather, all linked and transformed by the metal's strange properties. The metal itself could control violent radiation. Stacked together by chance and hammered by explosive forces, the creature essences had fused and undergone a wondrous transformation into what sat in her hands now. But it was still only a beginning. The connection between the creature heartstring and the goblin core was slight, hooked on only at the tail end. She could probably tear it off with a little more force. Hermione remembered Professor McGonagall's advice. When you find a suitable wand wood and core, do not cut or glue. Deliberate interference destroys the wand's integrity. Bring the 2 parts close, hold them tightly, and use your will to bind them. On the altar of bones, Hermione wrapped the heartstring around the metal like a coil, holding it fast with both hands and closing her eyes. Slowly, a bright yellow light slipped through her fingers. It wasn't a spell, but pure magic fueled by intention could do the work. The light flared, then was gone. Her hand was shoved away, as if by an invisible force. The rod resisted. She stared at it in disbelief. The goblins' craft was enduring. Their work did not decay easily. This rod had been made to control violent reactions. Its temperament, rigid and unyielding, reigned supreme. A sudden image from the vision returned, a hammer falling heavy, sparks flying in the forge. Maybe it needed to be forged to suffer a little, she thought. The place in the vision had been a military factory, probably nearby, its surface disguised as a guarded sentry post. Time passed. Harry finished the last strip of jerky and drank the final sip of the purified water. He wiped the sweat from his brow, and by the angle of the light, realized evening was closing in. The wand selection would be ending soon. He cradled the make he had chosen with satisfaction. This would be his wand for life. A broom whooshed overhead. Lily Potter drifted down from a patrol circle, passing the way as if on duty. "Are you finally finished?" she asked when she saw what he held. The smile that had begun on her face froze for a moment. "Son, wand styles aren't all the same anymore, but this, are you sure?" Harry swung the wand slightly. It was a crude steel flail, rugged, imposing, an oddly militant Soviet aesthetic that sent a gust of air with the motion and nearly knocked the 11-year-old off balance. He wound the flail's head between his hands and said seriously, "The wand body is the hammer I found from the big bell on top of the sentry post, and the core is pieces of the bell itself." He met his mother's eyes. "A bell calls warriors to battle and announces the dawn. My inclination tells me this is my wand. I'll use it to play the music of a new age." The young potions professor, his mother, looked at him with fond exasperation. His eyes were so like hers that she reached out and ruffled his hair. "You're as troublesome as any Potter," she said with a doting smile. "All right, hold on to it on the way back. If you drop it, you'll have to pick it up yourself." Footsteps interrupted them. Both turned as a chestnut-haired girl in a Gryffindor robe approached, leaning on a metal rod that was longer than she was. Harry blinked. "Hermione, how did you get here? Did you find your wand?" he asked, puzzled. If she'd really finished, a professor would normally have come to collect her. Hermione came up the path, wiped the scrapes on her face, and stopped to bow politely to Lily. "Professor Potter?" Then she turned to Harry. "I found it." She lifted the metal rod for them to see. "On the way here, I fought a 5-legged monster snake that had just come out of hibernation, but that was nothing." It didn't sound like a very lethal mutation, enough to bet a first year for a few days, a kind of training the professors left for children. Lily tensed. "Are you hurt? Poisoned?" The responsibility for her students' safety showed on her face. Hermione shook her head. "I'm fine, but my wand body and core are disobedient." She held the rod out so Lily could inspect it. 10. A good wand. "It's some kind of goblin metal, but I don't recognize it," Lily said, frowning. "After the goblins rebelled again and allied with Muggles, they developed strange alloys that ordinary wizards have trouble mastering." She noticed the heartstring wrapped around the rod. "Is this the wand core? I don't recognize that either." One should know she was one of the last 2 potion masters of this century. There were few materials she couldn't identify. "It smells of thestral blood, but there's also the sacred trace of a unicorn. How can those 2 even go together? And this grain, it's exactly like part of a bowtruckle's body." Hermione looked up at the professor, who had been slipping into the meticulous focus of scientific inquiry, and said, "When I touched it, I had a vision. There should be a military forge under this watchtower, a goblin forging platform." "Ah," Lily said, brightening. "With metal that stubborn, a little wizard's will might not be enough, but you actually have sky eye?" Ever since the world fell into chaos, true seers had become rare. Hermione shook her head. "I don't know. I only saw it when I touched the rod." "All right, let's go find the forging platform and tell your dean so she won't go mad if 2 children go missing." She couldn't let the girl go into unknown danger alone, so she released a silver doe to run and deliver the message. The old explosion hadn't done much harm underground. Guided by Hermione's vision, they moved down level by level through raw material bays, smelting halls, molding pits, and storage vaults. At the deepest research level, they found a circular hall, its perimeter ringed with wires and control panels. Red and green indicator lights blinked on large boxes, giving the place a brusque industrial feel. Closer to the center, the floor was etched with shimmering goblin script in concentric patterns. Cables ran inward toward a thick, half-stone, half-metal anvil sitting in the middle of a magic circle, a goblin forging hammer leaning beside it. Unbelievable! How the goblins have managed to marry Muggle tech and magic, Lily murmured, staring at the hybrid equipment. She used her wand to clear away the remains of those who had died of radiation and studied the devices carefully. Hermione felt the metal rod in her hand warm. This was its birthplace. "This is it. We found it." She nodded to Harry, stepped onto the forging platform, laid the rod wrapped with heartstring flat on the anvil, and lifted the goblin hammer. To her surprise, it was light, designed for short goblins but comfortable in her hands. She took a breath and stroked the rod with one hand, centering herself. "Forge, I suppose this is how it must be done." Magic swelled. An invisible wind whispered around the circle. The long, dormant cables crackled with electricity. The goblin anvil, once pitch black, began to glow from within. Professor McGonagall, who had received the message, arrived at that moment. She watched Hermione without interrupting and stepped quietly to Harry's side. Hermione raised the hammer. Clang! The sound rolled through the hall, loud enough to make them cover their ears. A gust burst from the rod, lifting Hermione's hair, but she stood with her eyes closed, chanting as she struck. Singing on a desolate plain, working beneath a hidden forge. The power to reconcile all things. Clang! The miracle of life in the face of death. Clang! I forge you. Clang! The blows came faster, each hammerfall accompanied by Hermione's soft, steady voice. Light flashed with every descent, like illumination for the world itself. Thunder from the stars, obey the ultimate truth of the ring of law, integrate and guide, let all streams converge as one. Clang! A wand is an extension of a wizard's will. Clang! Professor McGonagall murmured, almost to herself, astonished. Personality, a wand chooses a wizard, but a wizard forges the wand's order. She thought of Ollivander's notes she'd found in the ruins, and at last began to understand them. Under the goblin hammer, the metal gave reluctantly, then softened and bent. The heartstrings of the beasts blended into it. But it still wasn't enough for Hermione. A fire burned in her chest. The vision of the golden tree turned to ash, the meteor that had been the crucible for life, the queen forging cause and effect as one. The ring of law, the ultimate ordering everyone sought in the Forbidden Land, rose in her mind like a calling. "I will forge my own order," she cried, lifting the hammer high and striking again. Clang! Electric sparks leapt. Golden light poured out, and at last the goblin metal and the beast heartstrings fused perfectly, indistinguishable from one another. A wave of gold radiated from the anvil like the birth of a new star, stirring the fabric of the hall. It ceased to be mere goblin alloy or a component of a reactor. Under Hermione's hand, it became her wand, a rod granted the authority to mediate things, joined to the budding miracle brewer who had wrought it. When the light faded, a magnificent staff lay on the anvil. Silver-white along its length, it was engraved with patterns of surging beasts in motion. Within the etchings, a faint golden light flowed. At the head of the staff, a closed flower bud contained a cerulean glow, like the energy of the Philosopher's Stone held tight. The hammer slipped from Hermione's fingers with a final clang. She leaned on the anvil, exhausted, scarcely able to stand. The forging had drained her magic. She felt as though she hadn't slept in days. Lily rushed forward with a restorative potion and poured it between Hermione's lips. Color returned to the girl, and her strength visibly improved. "Although it's past the official time for wand selection," Professor McGonagall said with a rueful smile, "this is the most spectacular wand-making I've ever seen. Miss Granger, you've given me another surprise." If first year had started, I'd be tempted to award 20 points to Gryffindor. Hermione hugged the staff and smiled. When the four of them returned to Hogwarts on 2 brooms, most of the students and professors had already come back. There had been injuries, but no larger tragedy. Hermione, having rested a moment, had just dismounted when Lucius Malfoy, cold and furious, pushed through the crowd. He raised a pale, human bone wand, the expression on his face a promise of violence. "Lucius, what are you doing?" Professor McGonagall stepped in front of Hermione like a lioness. "You would attack a student at Hogwarts?" Since she became head of Gryffindor and Transfiguration Professor in 1956, no one had dared raise a wand against one of her students without consequence. "You ask her what good she did. She nearly killed Draco, Lucius roared. His venom was no longer sly intrigue, but open rage, the old rivalry with Gryffindor exposed. A noble pureblood attacking a classmate, trying to make a wand from a classmate's hand and tongue. Do you not have the courage to accept the cost of failure? Hermione stepped out from behind McGonagall, leaning on her silver-white staff, eyes bright and unbowed. The recently restored power of the Philosopher's Stone within her staff gave the air about her a pale blue sheen. McGonagall was incredulous. "Lucius, how dare you bring the rules of Malfoy Manor into Hogwarts? If Dumbledore were here, if Dumbledore could still prop up his decrepit body," Lucius began, but McGonagall cut him off. She drew her wand, and an incredible aura rose from her. The courtyard seemed to shiver as if a great bell had been struck. Even the professors fell silent. Authority and surging magic warned everyone not to provoke her. The silence held until a weak voice broke it. "Father." Draco stood, pale but cleansed of radiation. Tucked into his waistband was a wand of decayed-looking wood. The moment Hermione saw it, she knew it was a wand. "Draco, it seems you followed my advice," Hermione said suddenly, easing the tension. "You didn't run to your father for help in time. You endured the pain and found a wand that truly belongs to you, didn't you?" Draco said nothing, but his face answered her. "May I see it?" Hermione held out her hand. Draco hesitated, then took out the wand and handed it over. Lucius tried to stop him, but McGonagall's stern gaze froze him. Perhaps because she had just completed a difficult forging, or perhaps because the goblin hammer still hummed with power, McGonagall's perception was razor-sharp. She closed her eyes briefly as she examined the wood. "Rotten wood pulled from a swamp, but the heartwood is sound," she said. "I see you wading through cold mud, crying but pressing on. The core, it's an unborn snake egg. Life and death are tangled. I don't know the exact breed, but I saw the mother shielding her young from the flames." Draco's mouth dropped open. Every detail hit true. "Sky-Eye?" McGonagall whispered to Lily. Lily nodded, hesitant. Hermione handed the wand back to Draco. "This is a good wand, stronger than one made from a classmate's hand and tongue." With that, she turned and walked toward the castle. 11. Cruel World wand selection had been a brief interlude for the first years. The day after it finished, classes were to begin in earnest. But Hermione's extraordinary performance the day before had spread through the school. Not only the new students, but many older ones, now knew there was a Muggle-born witch among the newcomers who had nearly beaten young Malfoy to death. That was not a small matter. Lucius Malfoy had served as Slytherin's head for years, and his influence ran deep among the young wizards. With everyone expecting his son Draco to be the brightest star of the year, even outshining Harry, who was also a professor's child, Hermione's near victory caused more than a little stir. "I'm sure he'll make things difficult for you in reversal of anti-wizard techniques," Ron said around a mouthful of food. "Old Malfoy isn't the magnanimous type, and you almost killed his son. If he causes trouble, we'll go to Professor McGonagall," Harry suggested. "He seems to be afraid of her." One consequence of the relaxed rules about what could function as a wand was that first years turned up with all kinds of strange implements. Harry's wand was a heavy iron flail propped against his stool, giving him the look of a medieval knight who just staggered in from the battlefield. Hermione's long staff was awkward to manage, so she had to lay it flat across their seats so the three of them could share space. One older student's wand was a trombone. He had played it from the corridor into the great hall, blowing pink bubbles that burst into tiny fireworks. A round-headed cane suddenly flew from a nearby table, pinning someone's collar to the wall, and the caretaker Filch appeared with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd seen it all. Hermione didn't sense any magic from this well-dressed, unassuming man. He seemed more like an old-fashioned British gentleman than a wizard, but she admired his throwing skill. The image was almost comical. A polite, neatly groomed old man standing as steady as a spear, calm and confident as if to say, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," even while the world around him fell apart. More importantly, Filch was never without his clingy, sleek, and vocal cat, Madame Norris. She had earned him a certain reputation. Many older female students, and even some alumni, still harbored a soft spot for the caretaker, though he seemed devoted entirely to Hogwarts and turned them all down. "What's our first class?" Hermione asked. "Transfiguration," Ron answered. "Everyone says Professor McGonagall always makes the first lesson for new students her own." "Then we need to hurry," Harry said. "Percy warned that the staircases change and first years get lost." "Which brother? He never told me," Ron grumbled. "We always act together. You never listen to what your brothers say." Harry laughed and exposed him. "You never told him either." "Have you read the books yet?" "I haven't seen our textbooks," Hermione asked. It seemed obvious that classes would need books. "The professors will give them out," Harry said. "They don't print them until they know how many students there are. Books are expensive these days, so Professor McGonagall will hand them out in class." "They're not free, though," Ron added. "As payment, new students have to work for Hogwarts during the holidays." Even in this broken world, Hogwarts still kept long vacations. Wizard family children could go home. Muggle-borns generally didn't return to their families and instead often traveled with the professors as part of a work-study arrangement. They helped however they could, and the professors taught them survival skills they'd never learn in a classroom. Many Muggle-borns had been rescued from terrible situations, snatched away from burning settlements, or otherwise saved from Death Eaters, and their families, if they hadn't been killed or driven off, often rejected them. The professor's recruitment of those children frequently began with a desperate grab for a kid and a hasty retreat under fire. Even the best among the professors often looked exhausted. "Why do the Death Eaters always show up near Hogwarts?" Hermione asked. She remembered feeling the ground shake first, and only then seeing the Death Eaters attack nearby settlements, which suggested Hogwarts wasn't far away. "It's the Green Flame Party," Harry said darkly. "My mum says they're monsters." After the war that shattered the world, someone almost as dangerous as the Dark Lord of old rose up, Harry continued. Lord Voldemort, Dumbledore's brilliant former student, started showing his ambition. He founded an organization called the Death Eaters, at first obsessed with conquering death itself, chasing eternal life. At the start, it was more of a fringe group. It wasn't easy to tell whether they were wholly evil. But over time, whatever they dabbled in made them more powerful and uglier in their methods. "He even seized a swath of land from the goblins and set up a base," Ron said. "They do every kind of atrocity. Wizards, muggles, goblins. No one's safe. They're all good at the killing curse. That green light practically became their symbol. In the Albanian forests, you can almost always see strange green flames." "Then one day Voldemort turned up at the school and fought Dumbledore," Harry said. He grabbed the acceptance quill. "That's the artifact the four founders left, the one that, along with the Book of Admittance, decides who's eligible to enroll," Harry explained. "After Voldemort took it, Dumbledore had to make a new one. But Voldemort still gets a list of the students Hogwarts plans to recruit. The acceptance quill's standards were pretty broad, so many squibs creep in that way." "No one really knows why Voldemort began slaughtering young wizards," Harry finished. "Maybe he's gone mad. Maybe he's done something terrible to himself." As for why Death Eaters keep turning up near Hogwarts, Harry spread his hands. "The school always tries to set its routes near as many potential students as possible. The world's huge. If Hogwarts was too far away, the professors couldn't reach all the children. My mum gets hurt almost every year around this time," Harry said, voice tight with anger. "Dad's warned her a dozen times, but she keeps going. If I meet those Death Eaters, I'll smash their heads in." He swung his flail and nearly toppled off his stool. Hermione steadied him with her staff. By the time the trio reached the Transfiguration classroom, quite a few students were already seated. With the school population reduced, most classes were now taught with all four houses together, which had greatly lightened the professors' workloads. Hermione noticed Draco sitting in a corner, surrounded by Slytherin children. His face was still a little pale, but he looked mostly recovered. He glanced at her, then quickly turned away and pretended to be deep in conversation. They found seats and settled in. Perched on the podium was a rather fierce-looking tabby cat, a long scar running from its shoulder blade down to its lower back, surveying the room with a stern gaze. Ron, always ready with a sharp remark, was about to make one when Harry and Hermione simultaneously clapped a hand over his mouth. "That's Professor McGonagall," they said flatly. Hermione had heard about this during the wand-making tutorial, but seeing it in person still felt extraordinary. This was not a disguised charm like the ones used in the Forbidden Land. It was a full transfiguration. Even so, her keen perception let her sense the magic at work. As the last of the students arrived, the tabby leapt down and in a shimmer became Professor McGonagall. To preserve the dignity of her office, she looked more solemn than usual, offering only a small, approving smile before addressing the class. After a quick scan to make sure everyone had noticed, she said, "Very keen observation, Miss Granger. I look forward to your performance in divination." Then, more seriously, "As you can see, I am an animagus, one of the last few certified when the Ministry of Magic still existed." Decades ago, transforming oneself into an animal was extraordinarily dangerous, and only a few wizards with profound mastery of transfiguration were permitted to attempt it, she continued as she paced. Today it remains difficult, but we expect each of you, by your 7th-year final examinations, to have mastered this branch of magic as far as you can. It will be of great use to you in the dangerous world you are about to enter. Failing to master it will not, of course, prevent you from graduating. She let that sink in. If one could change into an animal, escape or infiltration became far easier. Things without obvious magic tended to draw less attention. Her tone hardened. That does not mean transfiguration is simple. On the contrary, because we have raised our graduation standards, you will be required to attempt many dangerous exercises while still under our supervision. She drew a breath. No one wants their children to suffer misfortune, but if it means leaving them to face a darker world unprepared, we would rather they face danger under our watchful eyes. Back at the podium, she tapped the table with her wand. The wood collapsed into a puddle of fine black powder. "Transfiguration is a dangerous subject," she said. "Even a tiny mistake can reduce a target to black powder, capable of blowing up the entire building." The powder started to smolder, and a hush fell over the room. Before anything disastrous could happen, McGonagall reversed the change and the table snapped back into place. "Caution and a willingness to try," she added, "are not just for transfiguration, but the attitude you should have toward all your studies at Hogwarts." She eyed them and said, "I will now distribute the textbooks. Each of you will receive exactly one set. If it is damaged or lost, you will have to go to Malfoy Manor and do odd jobs to earn the money to have it reprinted. I imagine the lessons you miss will be enough to have you repeat the year." She unclipped a small pouch from her waist, and pre-sorted stacks of books flew out and landed precisely on each desk. "Take out the first volume, Elementary Transfiguration," she instructed. "You may read the rest at your leisure." Hermione opened the book with a small, excited gasp. Finally, she could study the formal magic of this world. Compared to the destructive arts she'd seen in the Forbidden Land, the everyday applications of transfiguration were fascinating and incredibly broad. She had heard that even Headmaster Dumbledore, the most powerful white wizard she had yet to meet, was a master of this branch. "The essence of magic is willpower," McGonagall said. "For young witches and wizards, learning to channel your intent precisely is your primary task at this stage. Transfiguration is the process by which a wizard's will reshapes the world. But such change is not achieved overnight. Before we begin practical transfiguration, we must first learn." She tapped the blackboard, and a few lines of script appeared, Gamp's Law of Elemental Transfiguration. She looked around, and remembering the realities of the post-war world, added, "Are there any first-year students who are illiterate? If so, come to me after class, and I will arrange for extra lessons." Many Muggle parents had been unable to teach their children to read and write during the war. Any students who could at least speak fluently were fortunate. Thankfully, this year's Muggle-born pupils had received some home education, which saved a great deal of trouble. The first half of the lesson went over theory. Harry and Ron, having heard some of the basics back at the Burrow, found it hard to pay attention. Only Hermione listened closely, jotting down key points. In the second half, McGonagall had everyone take out their wands. Looking at Harry's heavy flail, she couldn't help the faint twitch at the corner of her mouth. "Recent innovations in theory show that spellcasting is not strictly limited to waving the wand itself," she said as she moved among the desks. The wand is an extension of the wizard's will, meant to focus and refine it. If you are holding your wand, you can use your hand to perform the same motions as wand movement. She transferred her wand to her left hand, and with an elegant sweep of her right, turned a curtain into a shower of butterflies. Note: this is not advanced wandless magic. I still relied on my wand. I simply concealed it behind me. If you find yourself in the wild, this trick is useful for alarming the uninitiated and convincing them you are a great wizard, she said dryly. Now, touch your wand with one hand and practice the motions with the other. Which hand you use is up to you. Hermione held her wand in her left hand and tried casting with her right. The Forbidden Land had no equivalent. There, spells were bound to weapons as soul combat skills. Both systems had their strengths. She saw Harry gripping his flail in his right hand and attempting spells with his left, apparently intent on continuing his head-smashing experiments. Hermione's aptitude shone through. Whether from her original body or a gift from the Tarnished, she was unusually quick to grasp the essence of spellwork. She was the only one in the class to truly get it and successfully transfigured a spent bullet casing into a quill holder. Professor McGonagall rewarded Gryffindor 3 points for the achievement. Harry managed only to alter the casing's texture so it felt like wood. The professor gently advised him to put the flail down. Holding it constantly drained his energy. Ron, Draco, and most of the others were still behind, producing nothing more than slight tentative changes to the metal. 13. Potions. They had gotten so many books that the 3 of them had to go back to their dormitory before lunch to put them away. After that, they hurried to the Great Hall. As soon as they sat down, there was a faint rumble. Every plate on the long tables trembled. A first-year shrieked, but Percy was quick to hush him. Hogwarts is just settling itself. Don't be nervous, he announced loudly to the whole hall. Wand selection is over. It's time for Hogwarts to set off. Where are we going? A child asked. Percy shrugged. Maybe to the ends of the earth, maybe to the edge of the sea, maybe to a new home with blue skies and flowers on the branches where everyone can live safely. All the children were swept up in Percy's romantic description, except Hermione. From the moment she had received her textbook, she had refused to put them down. Potions was that afternoon, and she was still holding her potions book, doing one last preview. Relax, Harry said, trying to comfort her. My mum's easy to talk to. She won't make things difficult for young witches and wizards. Ron chimed in with a grin and a touch of gloating. It's you, though, Professor Potter's son. If you don't get an O in this class, I don't think you'll be allowed out of the house over the holidays. Harry's smile dropped. Even though I learned the basics in first year, I'm sure Mum will expect third-year standards, or higher. Potions is the art of precision and inspiration. If your stirring wand work is half as good as your broom work, I'll thank Merlin. Ron imitated his mother's tone and made a face. Why does my usually gentle mum turn so sharp when it comes to potions? Hermione popped a fried grasshopper into her mouth and, pointing at a paragraph in her book, said with relish, Your mum is one of only 2 potion masters alive today who can brew Felix Felicis. Look, Madame Lily Potter's improvements to Wolfsbane potion are enough to make her go down in history. Many people say that proves she's better than the other master. She looked at Harry. Who is the other master? Harry hesitated, then shrugged with a faint sneer. Severus Snape. He joined the Green Flame Party. He once pursued Mum, but obviously he didn't succeed. Just a guy who became a potion master with a bit of luck. Hermione noticed the influence of Harry's father's prejudices in his tone. Oh, by the way, there aren't just 2, Ron said suddenly, lowering his voice. I heard my dad say there's also a Grandmaster at Malfoy Manor who can brew Felix Felicis, but he rarely shows himself. Why are they all at Malfoy Manor? Hermione asked, puzzled. She had heard that name so often lately it seemed like everything in the wizarding world led back to it. Ron explained, After the war, many ministries of magic around the world were devastated, but the pure-blood noble manors were surprisingly intact. As the largest pure-blood family, the Malfoys organized willing purebloods and built up Malfoy Manor into a kind of fortress. It has influence across much of Europe's wizarding circles. It might not have the deep magic of Hogwarts, but you can buy almost anything a wizard needs there. Flying brooms, magical books, magical creatures, cauldrons, clothes, food. If you have money, you can live very well there, Harry added. And all kinds of dark arts tools. If it makes money, those purebloods will sell it, Ron said with disgust. But the wizards who live there have a hard life, Harry went on. The purebloods monopolize everything. Even the banks that hold galleons are watched by their house elves. If you won't bow to the purebloods there, you can't survive. Sounds worse than the Wizengamot, Hermione said. The Dark Lord wouldn't even bother with them, Harry scoffed. They were arrogant enough to think they could negotiate with him, but they never even met him. Madame Rosier booted them out. Lucius lowering himself to come and teach at Hogwarts? Hermione asked. Ron rolled his eyes. Malfoy Manor runs like a parliament. In recent years, the speaker has come from other families, but next year, it should go back to a Malfoy. Lucius has been trying to make the speakership a lifetime position, but he hasn't succeeded. After his last failure, he came to Hogwarts in a fit of pique. It all feels complicated, Hermione said casually, then went back to her reading. She had less and less time to study. It wasn't until Professor Potter walked into the classroom that Hermione finally tore her eyes away from her book. The professor smiled as she scanned the room full of young wizards and witches. Mr. Malfoy. Draco started and stood up. Yes, Professor, I'm here. If I wanted to prepare Prussian blue, what would you use? She asked. Draco blinked. I don't know, Professor. He looked at Lily's expression and said, puzzled, Isn't this potions? Why would we be talking about pigments? Mr. Potter? Lily asked next. You'd use wood ash and ox blood, Professor, Harry answered quickly, standing. In class, you should call me Professor, Lily chided with a pleased look. She turned back to Draco. If you had a bundle of seaweed in front of you, what would you do with it? Draco still looked confused. I don't know, Professor. Mr. Potter? I'd extract agar from it. It's a great thickening and stabilizing agent, Harry said. Professor? This time, Lily didn't look entirely satisfied. She swept her gaze over the students. Does anyone else have other ideas? Hermione raised her hand. It can also be used to treat radiation sickness. It's an important ingredient in an anti-radiation potion. Gryffindor earns a point, Lily said approvingly. Then, looking at the pale-faced Draco, she continued more gently. With all due respect, Mr. Malfoy, it's not that I bear any prejudice against you. She chose her words carefully. But yesterday, you underwent a radiation treatment and drank a bottle of anti-radiation potion. Both Prussian blue and agar are key components. This, brewing the anti-radiation potion, is the most important thing we'll learn in first year. She gave him a small, regretful nod. Please sit down. And everyone, write this down. I do wish Miss Granger weren't the only one who previewed before class. A few of the other students looked put out, but they had only just received their textbooks and had only skimmed them. Lily then turned to Harry. Mr. Potter, please come to my office after class. Hermione and Ron exchanged a look that plainly said, good luck. Professor Potter's smile had an edge to it today. She was not as indulgent as she usually seemed. 14. Perfume-making technique. Potion class is an art of precision and inspiration. Now, put away your wands. I don't want to see anyone carelessly casting spells at their cauldrons. Mrs. Potter ruled the potion classroom like a queen, her authority magnified by the steam curling up from the cauldrons and pooling beneath the ceiling. According to the new syllabus, you must master the improved Wolfsbane potion by your 7th year. If anyone shows exceptional skill, I'll recommend them try for Felix Felicis. Her gaze lingered on Harry and Hermione, as if she had high hopes for both. Harry leaned toward them and whispered, She's the one who drew up the syllabus, muffling his words as best he could. From the podium, Lily continued, By the end of your 3rd year, you must learn Goblin Poison, Polyjuice Potion, and the Draught of Living Death. This year's major goals are Anti-Radiation Potion and Dittany Essence. The first will help you survive in many high-radiation environments. The second can save you from injuries caused by pneumatic rifles and chainsaw swords. She tapped a cauldron. The sound was crisp. Once upon a time, potion making was the road to fame and immortality. A true potion master carried respect wherever he went. Now it's your most important means of self-preservation in the world. Whether healing potions, enhancement draughts, or poisons, a wide variety of brews helps you survive and can turn defeat into victory. Pair up and open your books. Today we'll learn the preliminary step for the anti-radiation potion, extracting Prussian blue. Students paired off at her command. Hermione and Ron worked together. Harry, however, was told to do the whole procedure alone, his mother's particular brand of attention. Hermione was fascinated by potion making in this world. In the Forbidden Land, the tarnished rarely brewed potions. They relied on the flask of crimson tears for status restoration and the sporadic tears from the golden tree's offspring for elixirs. Tears were scarce, though, so each dose was a gamble. Drink too soon, and you'd be stuck with nothing when you really needed it. Back in Lanedale, royal capital, there was a craft akin to potion making, perfumery. Perfumers had served nobles as esteemed herbalists, then been sent to war during the Shattering. Their art had corrupted and evolved. Perfumes became poisons and even gunpowder. They were healers, supporters, and warriors. Invigorating perfume and uplifting aromatics had effects like enhancement potions, and Huaho Xiang was said to rival high explosives. Some perfumers who consumed their fragrant powders suffered strange bodily changes. Rumor held their greatest secret was a resurrection medicine, though many spent their lives chasing a legend they never caught. As a finger witch, Hermione already knew how to make many scented powders. She wanted to recreate them here if she could, to cross-pollinate ideas between perfumery and potion making. The only real prerequisite was keeping Ron from ruining everything. He had already spilled Highland cattle blood more than once, and almost sneezed into the wood ash. Quick-thinking Hermione used a recent transfiguration to turn the wood ash temporarily into stone, preventing everyone from being coated in ashes. Prussian blue was discovered in the 18th century by Muggle chemists, Mrs. Potter lectured as she moved among the cauldrons, watching their hands. For over 100 years, no one thought the pigment had much value. It wasn't until the nuclear war that my old colleague, Professor Slughorn, found it remarkably effective in treating radiation and helped transform that Muggle material by magic. Because of the fallout from the nuclear war, many parts of the world will remain hostile to wizards for some time. The anti-radiation potion will be something you use a lot in the coming century. She peered at Ron. Mr. Weasley, if you had half your mother's carefulness, Miss Granger would save herself a great deal of trouble, and Gryffindor might earn an extra point. Mr. Malfoy, I know cow's blood might feel beneath someone of your station, but remember, it cured your radiation sickness. If you must vomit, turn away. If you contaminate the materials, both your and your partner's grades for this class will be voided. Harry Potter, how have I taught you? For rapid dissolution of powder, at what angle do you hold the stirring rod? The lesson passed under Mrs. Potter's watchful motherly instruction. Hermione and Ron managed the Prussian blue extraction. Barely. Their sample's purity and appearance left much to be desired, costing them any extra points. Harry returned to the Gryffindor common room, dead on his feet just before curfew. Ron and Hermione were at the chessboard. Hermione, who usually had nimble fingers and a practical brain, surprised herself. Despite being clumsy in many ways, Ron played a mean game of wizard's chess and could spar with her, even while she read. She'd only just learned the rules. You're done, Ron said, moving a piece while shooting Harry a sympathetic look. You're going to spend the next 7 years in potions like this. We brought treats, Hermione offered. Bullfrog pie or snail pie. Which do you want? Harry waved a hand weakly. Mom had Dobby send dinner to the office. I already ate. He grimaced a little. I ate it while dealing with the thick juice of the Mimblelus Mimbletonia. Your mother has high hopes for you. Hermione took the bullfrog pie so nothing would go to waste and handed the snail pie to Ron, then used her queen to checkmate him casually. This is outrageous. How are you so good on your first try? Ron demanded, biting into the pie and flipping the board aside in a huff. Are your parents really Muggles? Harry asked Hermione. Or is there some powerful wizardry in your family? You reflected a killing curse during that riot, picked up wizard's chess in an instant, and you practically have a lost sky-eye ability. You're like the product of a god and a mortal in a story. Hermione turned a page, unfazed. This is what a Muggle upbringing looks like, full of unexpected possibilities. 15s. After a night apart, when the Gryffindor first years met again, they were all startled by one another's dark circles. "You two stayed up all night too?" Hermione inspected the boys with a suspicious look. That wasn't like them. "You're being ridiculous." Ron was the first to complain. Harry's pre-Hogwarts tutoring had already put him ahead of the others, and Hermione, who was ahead of most of the class, was obsessively studious. Harry glanced at them, leaned in, and whispered, "We went for a night stroll." "You had the energy for a stroll after being locked up all night?" Hermione marveled at the boys' boundless energy. "Class is class, and night strolling is a separate energy bar," Ron said proudly. Even with dark circles, the excitement in their eyes shone through. "Youth," Hermione sighed. "It must be youth." "But don't professors patrol at night? How did you avoid them?" Hermione fretted. First years were clumsy like Muggles, and she half expected them to bump into a suit of armor in the corridor. Harry shot a look at Ron, and Ron immediately shifted to block the view of anyone in the common room as the three huddled in a corner. Harry quietly produced a flowing silvery cloth from his cloak. An invisibility cloak. "It's a Potter family heirloom," Ron said with envy. "Unlike ordinary cloaks that stop working after a few years, this one's been passed down for centuries and still turns invisible." "My dad wanted me to bring it to Hogwarts," Harry whispered, "but Mum thought it was a bad idea. She knew Dad used it to do stupid things, so Dad secretly gave me the real cloak and got an ordinary one for himself. If Professor Potter finds out, your father and you will be made into potion ingredients," Hermione said with hard certainty. "Then she mustn't find out," Harry declared, determined not to give up night strolls. "Want to come tonight? The cloak's big, 4 of us could fit." Hermione was unmoved. "I'm not interested in kicking tin cans around in the corridor at midnight." Ron tried another tack. "Hogwarts has loads of secret passages, maybe a chamber of secrets, maybe treasure. I don't want to become ingredients in Professor Potter's cauldron. If you're caught with us, maybe only we'll turn into ingredients. My mum likes you loads. At worst, she'd make you help stir the pot." "I still have many textbooks to read," Hermione said firmly. "Of course, I won't tell the professors about your night strolls either." "All right." Seeing Hermione was immovable, the boys gave up. They had hoped that with Hermione joining their little adventures, their safety would improve dramatically. "Wait," she said suddenly, reconsidering. "Once I've finished my textbooks, perhaps I'll join you on a night walk." The boys stared, puzzled that she had changed her mind so quickly. "I finished Standard Book of Spells, grade 1 last night," Hermione explained. With her reading speed, a few first-year textbooks wouldn't occupy her for long, and she'd heard the restricted section was off-limits to young students. As for how to get 2 adventure-obsessed boys into the library, just tell them there's treasure in the restricted section. "Oh my goodness, you did it in one night?" Ron nearly screamed, clutching his head. "It took me half a year to learn that." Harry looked crestfallen. "I thought I could dominate the whole year." That had been his biggest reason for accepting all the pre-Hogwarts tutoring. They ate breakfast in a daze and only began to recover when they reached Charms. Professor Flitwick, their Charms teacher, was part goblin, a good goblin, as the students liked to say. Perhaps a traitor to other goblins, he was unfailingly kind to wizarding children and also served as Ravenclaw's head. Hermione hadn't noticed up close before, but today she saw him standing on a stack of books and realized his left arm was entirely metal, a cold, hard goblin-forged prosthetic that reached up under his collar. When he moved it, the gleam of goblin steel showed through. It looked like the same kind of metal she had read about in descriptions of goblin-made artifacts. Though the arm incorporated Muggle engineering and enchanted components, it moved with the fluidity of flesh. No clanking gears, no mechanical sounds, almost like a natural limb. "I heard he used to be a dueling champion," Harry whispered. "Then he traveled the world until he was ambushed by dark wizards and goblins and lost an arm. After that, he joined Hogwarts. His living silver prosthetic is a clever alchemical creation, Muggle engineering, goblin craft, and wizard magic all in one. They say it's better than the original," Ron added. "His wand's embedded in the arm and can pop out when he needs it. Isn't that brilliant?" Flitwick clapped his hands and, with a softening charm that amplified his voice, addressed the class. "Right, children. Please forget about my metal arm for a moment. This will be your first charms lesson." He gestured with his flesh and blood hand. Presumably in transfiguration, you've begun to learn how to cast with the hand, not holding the wand. This technique is extremely valuable and will be a focus this term. He raised his metal arm and several lines of writing shimmered onto the blackboard. By curriculum, you must master basic nonverbal casting by the time you graduate. Undetectable extension charm, apparition, and shield charms are compulsory. Of course, if you can master wandless casting and reflective spells, I can exempt you from the exam in this subject. As he spoke, Flitwick shot a subtle glance at Hermione. He knew the little girl had once reflected a killing curse. By the end of third year, everyone must master the Patronus charm, Confundo, and the disillusionment charm. These will keep you safe on your adventures. This year our focus is on gestural casting while holding a wand and on 20 basic spells. At the mention of 20, the young wizards groaned. Thanks to Hermione's performance in potions, many had already glanced through their textbooks. They knew what 20 spells meant. Even Harry, who'd read ahead before Hogwarts, had only managed a few trick-level gestural charms. Now they had to learn 20 in a single year. Excluding exams and holidays, that meant roughly one new spell every 2 classes. A crushing workload for most students, with other subjects piling on homework. Hermione remained unperturbed. She thought 20 a year sounded far too few. Although the lesson was labeled charms, Professor Flitwick spent as much time correcting wand movements and explaining the basic theory of magic in plain, patient language as he did teaching incantations, much more than Professor McGonagall, who preferred to skim over the theory. Most young wizards didn't care why a few words and a flick could make a feather lift. Hermione did. She was the first to make the feather rise and float in a neat, dancing arc, and was rewarded with an enthusiastic Gryffindor, 5 points from Flitwick. The levitation charm looked a little like gravity manipulation, but its principle was entirely different. In this world, the charm simply meant, I want the object before me to float, disregarding mass or gravitational force, which intrigued Hermione. To everyone's surprise, she trotted over to Professor Flitwick after class, perched on a stack of books, and began asking him earnest questions about magical theory. In McGonagall's class, that might have earned a deduction, but Flitwick encouraged curiosity. He had always been indulgent with first years, and over the years, boasted one of the lowest failure rates. He was delighted by a pupil brave enough to ask questions on the first day and answered happily. The essence of magic is, of course, determination. Perhaps willpower, he said. But I prefer the word determination. It carries a clearer sense of intent. In many spells you'll learn later that determination is more finely tuned. The Patronus charm, for example, requires you to channel happy memory and a determination to protect. The infamous unforgivable curses? Those demand malice. I won't be teaching you those. Spells, gestures, and wands are tools to help you shape determination, set a goal, and control emotion. For the truly skillful, those tools aren't always necessary. He frowned. Maybe it's a bit early to tell you all this. Professor McGonagall would complain about me going off the syllabus. But I heard you deflected a death curse under threat, he added with a grin. That kind of thing shows the point. When your emotions and will are strong enough, the world bends to them, even without a spoken spell. Hermione nodded. Compared with the magic of the Forbidden Land she had known, the British system was more flexible. In the hands of young students, it looked rigid, but a master could make it seem indistinguishable, an effect rather than a formula. The Forbidden Land's magic prized overwhelming power. If a shining stone meteor didn't finish a foe, you called down a larger meteor. If that failed, you summoned a comet. Even gods and empires bowed to such force. Auxiliary magics existed there, cloaking like disillusionment, realms that amplified power, potent gravity control and seals, and lengthy liturgies. But the emphasis was raw, crushing might. Compared to that, the destructive ceiling in this world felt modest. Avada Kedavra, once condemned as an unforgivable curse, was only a single-target death edict. Even decades after the war, the growth in destructive capability had limits. In the Forbidden Land, nuclear weapons might be fearsome, but they would never face down the Golden Dynasty or beings like the Star-Scourge General who sealed the heavens. Melania the Valkyrie with rot in her core, the world-burning fire giant Marika defeated, or the ancient dragons that once shifted whole cities through time. Class slipped by in a cheerful back and forth between Hermione and Flitwick. The Dean of Ravenclaw, who admired studiousness, took a particular shine to her. Learning that the Sorting Hat had misdirected Hermione into Gryffindor rather than Ravenclaw made him nearly storm the headmistress's office. That only deepened the petty resentment of the younger Ravenclaws. Hermione flaunted in potions, stole their dean's attention, and now had their envy to boot. Hermione, however, couldn't have cared less. The chestnut-haired bookworm was in high spirits and even treated herself to 2 extra Scottish Highlands beef ribs at lunch, the same ingredient they'd used in potions the day before. Ron, blunt as ever, joked that her appetite was approaching that of a lioness, and Hermione used her newly learned levitation charm to set his hair bobbing like a shaken, red-crested pheasant until she lowered it again before herbology. Afternoon herbology was Professor Sprout's domain. The short, plump, dirt-smudged Hufflepuff dean greeted every student with a warm smile as they entered the greenhouses. Hogwarts' greenhouse complex was underground and tiered. First years were confined to the uppermost range, where bright magic lamps mimicked sunlight. Sprout worried about those lamps constantly. There aren't many places these days that can afford to burn magic sunlight for long, she would lament, and when a clumsy boy knocked a leaf loose, she would flinch as if struck. 15 sickles. That leaf's worth 15 sickles. You'd have to do a week's odd jobs at Malfoy Manor to pay for it. She never punished them for accidental damage. Running the expensive greenhouses was punishment enough. The costs were relentless. Lighting, clean water, arable soil, and different plants demanded wildly different temperatures and humidity, some even needing their own magical environments. Even without formal herbology lessons, Hogwarts required a steady supply of magical plants and fungi. Professor Potter's potions were a strategic resource the school couldn't do without. Because Hermione had stayed up reading about charms the previous night, she only had time at lunch to skim 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. Her grasp wasn't deep yet, but she loved the descriptions. The biting cabbages with gaping maws, the mandrakes with their lethal screams. She even asked Professor Sprout if any pollens reacted with air and burst into flame. She wanted to try making the perfumer's hua hua shang. Sprout fixed her with a wary look. That plant isn't in your textbook, child. The white phosphorus flower is a mutant species discovered only recently. I paid a small fortune to have 2 specimens bought for me. I'm still hoping they'll propagate. Don't even think about them. Hermione abandoned the idea for now, but her eyes drifted to the door, already planning how to get a look into the lower greenhouses. With Harry's invisibility cloak, a greenhouse bought with galleons was practically guaranteed to hide treasures. 17. Flying Idiot. On the 3rd day of term, the timetable relaxed a little, only flying class in the morning, and the afternoon left for the students to manage as they pleased. The whole year was buzzing with excitement, especially those from wizarding families, because everyone wanted to try broom flight. My father and I went to the aerial cavalry parade at Malfoy Manor. Draco Malfoy was boasting loudly to a small crowd of new students. They use the best brooms in Britain, the Nuclear Ring 2000. It's the fastest broom around, built to fly through high-altitude radioactive dust. It comes with 20 Thunderbolt explosive balls, and the handle's treated so you can break it off and use it as an emergency wand. Ron curled his lip. He talks as if he was on the front lines himself. I saw him when he went to choose his wand. His venomous father practically flew him down the castle, and the poor boy went green. My father won the school Quidditch Cup, Harry said, eyes bright. He was the finest seeker of his day. I don't think I've got any less talent than him. I tried a toy broom at home, but it was so slow. I looked like a toothless old woman trying to loop a double figure 8. You're already attempting high-difficulty keeper moves? Ron said, surprised. It's a pity we haven't had real Quidditch matches lately. With fewer students, most houses can't even put together full teams. The World Cup's been suspended for ages, so I hear Ireland and a few others are trying to restart it, but without the various ministries around, it's almost impossible for wizards to organize anything big on their own. Used to be the best flyers were national team players, Harry continued. Now most of them are probably in the aerial cavalry of the great powers. Mostly in Europe, Ron said. I heard in the Middle East they prefer heavily armored flying carpets, 3 wizards to a unit. They carry ridiculous numbers of potion bottles and just throw them at whoever they see. They're not too worried about agile broom cavalry. There are 3 people to provide covering fire. So what happened to them? Draco demanded smugly. They still got beaten to a pulp by the Polish winged hussars, didn't they? Hermione didn't join in. She wasn't particularly excited about flying and mostly listened quietly while the boys argued. The flying class was held on a small lawn beside the castle, beyond which dropped a steep cliff. Professor Sprout had planted iron fences along the edge, but the warning was mostly symbolic. Any determined student could climb over them. The lesson was taught by Madame Hooch, a witch with hawk-like eyes. Fine flecks of fluorescent green ran through her hair, and the skin of her forehead had a scaly look, the older students said, from years of flying through radiation clouds. Before we begin, Madame Hooch bellowed, one thing I will not repeat. You will only fly around Hogwarts, no further, and under no circumstances chase any strange flying creatures. At her command, everyone had to summon their broom to hand with the standard charm. Hermione's broom, however, was stubborn and wouldn't obey at first, which gave Harry and Ron something to smirk about. Frustrated, Hermione booted the broom away, levitated her wand-shaped staff horizontally, and sat astride it diagonally, swinging like a child on a swing. It looked daring, until the reality of sitting on an unpadded stick showed itself. Without a cushioning charm, it dug painfully into her, and she shifted uncomfortably. Miss Granger, Madame Hooch snapped, supporting yourself on a levitation charm will not count toward your grade. And another point, sitting diagonally on your broom is a grave no-no. Only vain witches show off like that for Muggles, or an old crone who cannot sit properly. In combat, you become a stationary target and cannot change direction. Hermione had to clamber down and try the broom properly. Inside, she thought the whole broom as mop idea was ridiculous. If any competent witch flew like that, the Aurors, or whatever the enforcement body was called, would have a fit. Determined not to be outclassed in future, she resolved to focus on practicing gravity magic instead. Then, she thought darkly, any fool who tried to pass her would find themselves yanked off course and flat on the ground. Flying class over, the students had the rest of the day free. Harry and Ron decided to keep exploring the castle. Hermione retreated to the common room to finish reading her textbook for the next day's class. Reversal of anti-wizard techniques. She suspected Lucius Malfoy would try to make life difficult for her in that lesson, so she wanted to be ready. The book was called Countering Danger, Wasteland Survival Guide, written by a famous ranger wizard named Gilderoy Lockhart. According to the introduction, Lockhart had graduated from Hogwarts with top marks and spent the years afterwards roaming the world, breaking into Muggle military fortresses, rooting out mutated beasts' lairs, exploring the ruins of nuclear blast sites, dismantling inhumane cult strongholds, and helping countless wizards and Muggles. His adventures made him something of a legend. His reputation had even earned him an invitation from Malfoy Manor to become head Auror, an offer he declined politely. What impressed Hermione most was that Lockhart didn't hoard his knowledge. He wrote up his experiences in clear, helpful books and made them available to anyone who needed them. As a favor to his alma mater, he waived all fees when his books were adopted as school texts, and each year he updated them, sending a copy to Dumbledore with his letters. Hermione liked him for it. In her mind, in the Forbidden Land, she'd even be willing to become his finger witch, helping him ascend to whatever throne of Elden Lord such a man might deserve. Lockhart's guide was practical and well-organized. Clear classifications of dangers an inexperienced wizard might face, logical countermeasures, and plain, accessible explanations. Even though Hogwarts had picked a textbook for its practical usefulness rather than its storytelling, Lockhart still managed to bring the dangers vividly to life with lively prose. Hermione read every page with relish. With this book in hand, she convinced herself she had little to fear from anything Lucius Malfoy might throw at her in class. It was evening before Harry and Ron wandered back into the common room. Hermione had just reached the last page. She closed the book with a reluctant sigh. Good books were hard to leave. "You've been reading this long? You didn't even eat?" Ron asked, astonished. Hermione, who was usually the first at the Gryffindor table, had missed supper. Harry produced a wrapped roasted rat skewer from his bag. "Here, have this. I was saving it for a midnight snack on our stroll." Hermione's eyes lit up. "Thanks. Once I finish this, I'll come with you. Let's go look for treasure in the school." 18. Defense class. Finally, the first-year wizards had their first lesson in reversal of anti-wizard techniques. Hermione was already neatly dressed and sitting in the classroom with Harry and Ron, determined not to give Lucius Malfoy any excuse to find fault. Draco came in surrounded by a cluster of students, as if he were the star of this particular subject. This class was his home ground. Even with Hermione watching him, he didn't look flustered. His powerful backing made him confident. "How arrogant," Ron muttered. "Harry wasn't like this in potions." "Hey, Ron, your insults are getting dirtier and dirtier," Harry said, annoyed. Hermione flipped the last page of the textbook. She'd read it twice, and most of the key points were already memorized. At that moment, Lucius Malfoy entered like a proud platinum peacock, leaning on his cane and sounding out his steps like drumbeats. He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on Hermione far longer than anyone else, a thinly veiled malice in his eyes. "Reversal of anti-wizard techniques," he began, voice serious. "Formerly known as defense against the dark arts, wizards once believed only the dark arts could harm noble wizards." Surprisingly, he didn't immediately pick a fight. Instead, he gave a solemn opening speech. "But the cataclysmic changes in the world have struck the wizarding community hard. Nuclear weapons shattered everything. The curse of eternal winter continues. Goblins and muggles have allied to forge machines of steel. Magical creatures have been twisted by radiation and crossbred with mundane animals, producing countless malformed beasts that defy classification." His tone was slow and deliberate, almost poetic. "In this shattered world, the old order and etiquette no longer suffice. You, the hope of the wizarding world, carry the seeds of humanity's future. Only by refusing to be bound by outdated ideas can you create a better tomorrow." It was a stirring speech. If Hermione hadn't already known the sort of man Lucius was, she might have been moved. "Miss Granger." As expected, while the class still absorbed his words, Lucius immediately turned his attention on Hermione. She stood when he called. "Yes, Professor." "In recent days, I've heard much praise from other professors about you," Lucius said with a sneer. "Let's see if you deserve it. Tell me, what conditions cause a young witch or wizard to become an obscurial?" "Extreme oppressive environments, magic-related trauma, self-hatred, conscious suppression of one's power, external destruction," Hermione answered. The question was basic. She met his stare directly, refusing to be cowed. "Reading from the book?" Lucius mocked. "Is our little excellent witch only capable of parroting the textbook?" He leaned in slightly. "Let me tell you, in Muggle settlements, young wizards who have violent surges of magic are treated like demons and scourges. They suffer severe abuse. Recent surveys show obscurials are becoming more common in Muggle areas, and the damage they cause is increasing." So that's his angle, Hermione realized. He was using the question to put down Muggles while flattering his own prejudice. She lifted her chin. "The rise of obscurials isn't caused by Muggles themselves, but by prejudice and ignorance. That isn't about Muggle versus wizard. It's about what war has done to education and how prejudice widens the divide. Even among wizards, there are fools who cling to pure-blood dogma." "Hermione Granger," Lucius snapped, cutting her off coldly. "Disrespecting a professor. 5 points from Gryffindor." The classroom hushed. Everyone watched Hermione as she contradicted a professor. She didn't back down. Instead, she turned her head, snapped her fingers, and a tiny speck of starlight winked onto Draco's head. "What are you doing?" Lucius demanded, frowning. "Nothing. Just making a mark, Professor," Hermione said. "Teasing a classmate. Another 5 points from Gryffindor." Hermione said nothing more and flicked a second speck of starlight onto Draco. The 2 points of light intertwined and spun, casting a bright blue glow that reflected on the boy's bewildered face. "Twice," Hermione said, holding up 2 fingers. "Miss Granger, if you continue this childish behavior, I will remove you from the classroom for disturbing the lesson." Lucius barked, trying to sound stern, though his voice wavered a little. I will hit Draco, Hermione said, still holding up two fingers. Twice. The class froze. Someone was threatening to strike someone else's child, twice, in front of the professor and the child's father. But it was Hermione. Everyone felt in their bones that she might actually carry it out. Draco went pale. He remembered how once, when Hermione didn't even have a wand, she'd nearly killed him with sheer force of will. Now she had a wand and had learned more. Dealing with her would be easy. She could do it. He told himself that his father's protection would keep her from acting, that Lucius would never allow it. But if Hermione truly intended to follow through, there was no certainty Malfoy could always be by his side. Students from the same year attended classes together. Opportunities to corner him in a corridor, coming late, leaving late, were plenty. Professors usually overlooked occasional tardiness from top students. If Draco and his father ended up keeping him hidden in the Slytherin common room, forever accompanied by Lucius, that would be ruinous to the Malfoy reputation on its own. Lucius had never been contradicted like this, certainly not in such an absurd manner. For a moment he was stunned, then fury flared. Contradicting a professor, bullying a classmate, mudbloods truly are despicable. 20 points from Gryffindor. Remove those disgusting marks, or I will throw you from the tower, you filthy little witch. Magic surged. Lucius's silvery hair bristled like a creature about to strike. Hermione met him without flinching. The air seemed to freeze. Then she turned, waved her hand, and the two specks of starlight flew back into her palm. She's backing down? That thought flickered through the students' minds, and even Draco felt a rise of relief. Then Hermione's hand closed around the light, and she looked back at them. I'll keep hitting him, she said quietly. I'll hit him every time I see him. I'll hit him until he becomes an obscurial. Not only Lucius, but Harry and Ron looked as if they'd heard something insane. None of them had ever heard of someone being turned into an obscurial through repeated violence. The notion was shocking in itself. 19. Can you deduct points for fighting? Lucius felt the rage inside him break its last restraint. He sneered. You think Professor McGonagall is backing you? You think Dumbledore will protect you? You don't know what? It's not just me fighting him, Hermione interrupted, grabbing Harry and Ron by the sleeves, one on each side. Harry sat there with his mouth hanging open, his cheeks stuffed from the popcorn he'd been eating, while Ron's face was all eagerness, like a boy urging two fighters to get on with it. All first years, if you don't fight Draco, you'll be fighting me. Hermione's voice rang out clear and unshakable, as though she were some little queen of the year. No one in the class could remember bullying being openly declared like this. Hermione had no one to call, her parents were gone, so she had nothing to lose. Unless Lucius was a master of some dark political faction, his choices were limited. Expel her, let it go, or punish her publicly. Hermione was openly choosing the hard line. Lucius hesitated. He couldn't tell where her confidence came from. Maybe he shouldn't act rashly. A question rose in every first year's head. Should we join this fierce girl? After a heartbeat of weighing things up, nearly every face in the room, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, even the other Slytherins, looked at Draco with a mixture of sympathy and helplessness. They couldn't take Hermione, and secretly many wanted to see Draco get a comeuppance. Draco's face had gone an unhealthy white, as if he'd been struck by Shining Stone magic again. This had stopped being mere bullying. Hermione was mobilizing the whole year to isolate him. If she succeeded, Draco might survive physically, but over 7 years he'd have no friends, no connections after graduation. As the heir of Malfoy Manor, that would mean losing the support of a whole upcoming generation. His family's influence would erode, and Malfoy Manor could be forgotten. Lucius finally understood Hermione's resolve. If he pressed her, she would make good on her threat. From this day on, Draco's next 7 years could be misery. Lucius wasn't a monster in the abstract. He was an opportunist who loved his family enough to spoil his son. That weakness had been exposed to Hermione during wand selection, and she was exploiting it. If someone threatened his child, Lucius became dangerous. He reached into his robe as if to take something out, and Hermione felt, for a split second, a chill like death drifting from within his sleeve. Still, she was unmoved. Perhaps you could try using the power of Malfoy Manor to threaten Hogwarts into expelling me, she said calmly, almost helpfully. Hogwarts does not bow to threats, and no student will be expelled on someone else's say-so. A firm voice cut in from the doorway. Heads turned. Professor McGonagall stood framed in the doorway, lesson plans clasped in her hands, her expression composed. "Professor McGonagall, why are you here?" Lucius demanded, surprised. "I noticed a large fluctuation on the house points counter and came to investigate," she said evenly. "Lucius, may I sit in on your class?" Hermione, inwardly, thought the timing smelled suspicious. House points monitors were nowhere near the reversal of anti-wizard techniques classroom, but the fact McGonagall had appeared now felt like protection. Lucius froze then, visibly annoyed, then said through clenched teeth, "By all means." McGonagall turned to Hermione. "Miss Granger, Hogwarts does not encourage talking back to professors. If I hear it again, you will have detention." Hermione smiled and inclined her head. She understood. The warning was, in its way, a shield. Lucius scoffed at her. "Clever tricks. Do you honestly think the staff will fuss over a first year?" He stalked back to the podium. McGonagall sat quietly at the back of the classroom. Even the children could see the standoff had been won, at least for now, by Hermione. Just as everyone prepared to return to the lesson, Hermione spoke up again. "Wait, Professor. What more do you want?" Lucius snapped. "Return the points you took," Hermione said. She just lost 30 points, something she couldn't earn back in a week. She didn't want house glory for its own sake, but McGonagall had shown her kindness, and Hermione would not see the old professor distressed. McGonagall would not simply add points back for a student, so Hermione was asking Lucius to do the right thing. Lucius's face went a weird color. McGonagall had already told Hermione not to speak back, and now this little stunt. Draco's eyes went wide. He looked like he thought his father might actually strike someone, but Hermione stood unafraid. Lucius had thought intimidations like this would cow everyone. Clearly, this one didn't. "Miss Granger, you will come to my office for detention tonight," McGonagall called from the back, her voice stern but not unsympathetic. She offered no opinion on the points. Lucius's anger flickered, then grudgingly he said, "Fine." He reached for the points counter on the desk and with a snort returned the 30 points. "If my mom deducted your points, would you hit me too?" Harry asked quietly, more curious than alarmed. He'd seen Hermione face down worse. Hermione turned to him. "I'd brew you into a pot of foolish potion and send it to Professor Potter," she said, deadpan, and they both snorted. Lucius took a moment to reset his expression, and his voice turned cold and didactic. He displayed a harsh triangular bayonet on the podium. "This is a Muggle cold weapon. Its triangular cross-section causes horrendous wounds, profuse bleeding that's hard to stitch. Even with Dittany, it often heals poorly, leaving deformity." He let his anger fold into the lecture. "Note its tip. The alloy here includes goblin metal. Goblin-made components can bypass a wizarding shield charm far more easily than normal metal. Even if you master shield charms later, don't, under any circumstances, approach a Muggle clad in steam-powered armor. Similarly, Muggle pneumatic rifles often conceal one goblin metal armor-piercing bullet for every 5 ordinary ones. Many careless wizards have died from such hidden attacks." He hauled out a rifle. A long, soft tube ran to a steam backpack on the podium. He pulled the trigger with a practiced motion, the thwip, and a bullet embedded itself in the window frame. He then picked up something meaner. Chainsaw sword. The blade's serrated section, he explained, was laced with goblin metal. Spinning at speed, it could saw bone like paper. "I trust none of you want to be cut by that." Before the next lesson, everyone must hand in an essay on how to deal with Muggle weaponry and the use of goblin metal in such devices. Minimum length, 5 inches, he added sourly, with a glance at Hermione that made the rest of the class fidget. After assigning the homework, he only grew more forbidding. Reversal of anti-wizard techniques is not a purely theoretical class. Starting next time, you'll have practical sessions. This is a large class, 7th years will attend, and it will be held on the flying class ground. Professor Flitwick and I will oversee it. Every student will spar one-on-one. My class has no safety nets. Enemies will not follow any script to suit you. You must remember every word I say. A single oversight may be the cause of your death in future. The announcement of practicals turned the room from tense to electric. Harry's eyes lit up. He even reached without thinking for his steel flail. Quiet, everyone. Lucius thumped the blackboard so hard it rattled. He looked at them with thinly veiled menace. Do not think practical lessons are a joke. Even Professor McGonagall agrees that students should see consequences. He ignored the cool displeasure he could feel from the headmistress and swept out of the classroom with a swish of his robes. He would not remain a second longer in a room that contained that mudblood in his mind. 20. Please stop rolling. Miss Granger, I must say, you surprised me. Hermione sat in Professor McGonagall's office, facing the stern old witch who was rubbing her temples. I imagine that, from your studies these past few days, you have a better understanding of Malfoy Manor's standing in the magical world, McGonagall said. She sighed. Aren't you afraid he might actually do something outrageous? Nearly half of Europe's remaining magical community had gathered at Malfoy Manor. Even if not everyone there followed Lucius Malfoy's commands unquestioningly, they had 100 ways to torment a Muggle-born wizard. He's just a coward who puts on a brave front, Hermione said dismissively. In truth, she had been ready to drain herself to unleash a comet, but she hadn't been wrong. Lucius was even more cowardly than Draco. McGonagall seemed amused, but she did her best to sound stern. Perhaps living in a Muggle settlement has given you a unique perspective. But I must stress, at Hogwarts you must show respect to your professors, the old witch declared. The implication that other professors might be fair game for disrespect did not escape Hermione. Of course, Hermione was never stingy when returning kindness. Now, about my detention. If this time could be used to learn something more useful than busy work, it would be far better. McGonagall picked up the Elementary Transfiguration Guide, but Hermione interrupted. Professor, I have a small request. She blinked, a little embarrassed. Hermione tapped the teacup on the table. The cup, still holding tea, changed instantly into an elegant revolver. Hermione opened the cylinder, showed McGonagall the gleaming yellow bullets inside, then closed it. She covered one ear, aimed, and fired at the ceiling. The shot cracked, a bullet embedded in the stone. Dust sifted down. Hermione set the revolver back on the table and tapped it. It turned back into a teacup with a little less tea in it. Remarkably, a single drop fell from the spot in the ceiling where the bullet had lodged. You've mastered the entire first-year curriculum? McGonagall said, looking genuinely surprised. The transfiguration Hermione had just shown, transforming inorganic matter, nested transformations, secondary reactions of transformed objects, maintaining transformation during a reaction, and reversing transformations, wasn't simple first-year work. Some of it isn't even taught until third year, and yet Hermione had attempted it on her own. Turning a handgun for combat wasn't the most practical choice. Objects near an enemy are far easier to transfigure directly, but the technique itself spoke of real skill. I've almost finished the first-year textbooks, Hermione said, a little embarrassed. May I start on second-year material early? It's been less than a week since term started. McGonagall sounded exasperated and astonished. You've finished them all? Hermione thought for a moment. Basic Magic Theory, Elementary Transfiguration Guide, Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, Encountering Hazards, Wasteland Survival Guide. I've finished those. History of Magic, 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi, Magical Draughts and Potions, and Introductory Astrology. I've only started those, but I'll finish them all by next week. McGonagall let out a long breath. Finishing 4 core books in 4 days and actually mastering them rather than skimming was terrifying. She hesitated, then said, I'm sorry, dear, the textbooks change a little every year, so I can't give you next year's books, but I can help you borrow copies that older students used. That would be wonderful. Hermione's face brightened. Having more books would accelerate her learning. It may take a little time. Not many students keep their old books in such good condition. Very well, McGonagall smiled, and we can give you some more in-depth guidance on transfiguration. Hermione quickly became famous, not just among the first years, but across all 7 years. Everyone knew the new student who had almost killed Draco at the start of term, who had threatened Professor Malfoy in the first reversals of anti-wizard techniques class, and who had vowed to turn Draco into an obscurial. The most outrageous part was that she got away with it, no points lost. Fred and George Weasley set off fireworks in the common room and crowned their Gryffindor queen. The brown-haired lioness, scourge of the long table, serpent crusher, protector of the weak, Hermione Granger. Our queen, they declared. Ron boasted. I was right there. Harry nearly wet himself, but I was brave. If Hermione needed me, I'd be the first to go up and clobber Malfoy. Harry protested. Hey, Ron, I didn't wet myself. I was stunned by Hermione's bravery. And if need be, I can throw my Soviet aesthetics in Malfoy's face. Hermione watched them celebrate, a dimple on each cheek as she held a book. In this post-apocalyptic world, moments of joy were rare. Hogwarts preserved the last sparks. The following days settled into the calm that Hogwarts should have. Hermione attended astronomy in a dark, enclosed tower. The class was taught by a centaur named Firenze, said to be the only centaur from the Forbidden Forest willing to enter the castle when the original Hogwarts was destroyed and lived to tell the tale. He projected a false night sky in the classroom so children who had never seen real stars could learn constellations and celestial bodies. Even so, Hermione couldn't use the projection to experience true stargazing. Firenze also warned his students that if they ever encountered centaurs in the wild, they should run. Many had been blinded by hatred, abandoned traditions against harming foes, and fallen into depravity. History of magic was taught by an elderly Ravenclaw alumnus named Quirrell. Witty and well-versed in Muggle history, he wove together magical and Muggle events in a way that deepened Hermione's understanding of how this world had developed. He was a little timid, though. Mention of the Dark Lord who had raised Paris or of Voldemort's rampage through the Albanian forests made him shiver. Because Hermione always finished the textbooks before class, she frequently raised her hand to answer questions and became a major contributor to Gryffindor's points. Even though the heads of the other houses tried to favor their own students, Gryffindor's hourglass gems were far ahead. Every time McGonagall saw the girl, she smiled. Barring the unexpected, the House Cup would belong to Gryffindor this year.